Chapter 643. Due to the retreat of the Shadowblade and a few elders, the Viper Cross army in the city quickly lost to the army led by Rubens and was chased out of the city. Many of the soldiers who witnessed Roddy's terrifying destructive power were greatly boosted in morale. They all loudly shouted the news of "the enemy leader is dead." Just when they thought that Roddy would stop after Elder Weiss flew away, they saw him turn around and suddenly run towards the city wall 20 meters away. He sheathed his short sword and slung the dragon bone bow over his shoulder. Roddy approached the city wall and took 3 steps upward. Just as he was about to land halfway up the city wall, his hands seemed to have some kind of sticky power as he grabbed onto the city wall and continued to climb up. The enemy needed a ladder to climb up the city wall for a few minutes, but with Roddy's climb skill, it only took him 3 seconds to reach the top of the city wall. After reaching the top of the city wall, he ignored the soldiers around him. Instead, he took 2 steps on the city wall and activated Leap, leaping out of the city. The temple guards on the city wall were dumbfounded. They did not understand why Roddy would run up the city wall and then jump down. But just as the thought popped up in their heads, they felt the wind behind them. The diving Kelder duck flew past the soldiers' heads. The strong air currents even knocked down a few of the city guards who lost their balance. Roddy jumped up from the wall and stretched out his hand to grab the duck's hind leg. Using the strength of his arm, he flipped his body up and skillfully climbed onto the saddle on its back. He then looked into the distance and locked onto Elvis's figure before flying straight away. When the soldiers on the city wall reacted, Roddy was already 500 meters away. The high-level Kelder duck first climbed more than 100 meters before it started sprinting with all its might. Roddy sat on the saddle unhurriedly. After drinking a potion to recover his mana, he activated Awaken and slowly began to create energy arrows. It had been less than 3 minutes since Roddy launched his attack and jumped off the city wall. The Knights of the Sacred Army who were about to rush over had no idea what was going on. Some of them were still shouting nonsense. However, just as they approached the city gate, they saw Zack and the others in front of them running back with an expression as if they had seen a ghost. They asked loudly what had happened, but they only heard one thing from these people. Claude was dead. Dean was dead. Elvis had escaped. What's going on? What happened? But in the end, the answers they got made them scratch their heads. Some said that an invincible knight had killed several commanders one by one. Some said that there were spies in the army who had ambushed and assassinated them at the same time. The most exaggerated one was that there was a horrifying magical beast that had swallowed everyone alive. These things sounded ridiculous, but in this chaotic era of cold weapons, it was normal. As a result, the Sacred Army that was charging forward hesitantly slowed down their speed. When they saw the soldiers of the Rose Cross fighting desperately on the city wall of the Holy Cathedral, and the city gate that was forcefully closed by Rubens and his men, they gave up on the idea of entering the city and plundering. The sky was getting dark, and it was about to get dark. But at this time, the Sacred Army realized that there was no one around to give them any hints or leadership. They looked around blankly and did not know what to do next. In order to fill their stomachs, they could only return to the villages that were looted and eat. But after they retreated, many of them chose to leave quietly. After all, the purpose of hiring knights to fight was to earn money. Now that their employer was dead, what was the point of staying here? They might as well eat and drink to their heart's content and leave. Why would they care about Milner's situation now? In the Holy Cathedral, Rubens, who had finally stopped the battle, did not rest at all. He walked in front with a serious face, followed by Benjamin and the temple guards from the Bogdo parish. They pushed open the blood-stained inner city gate and walked into the center of power that they had just left this morning. No one wiped the bloodstains on the ground because the believers and priests who were in charge of cleaning up the city had all died in the battle during the day. Rubens could see the corpses on the side of the square. Among them, there were even 3 cardinals in red robes. The 8 cardinal bishops who were sent to the outer city by the Pope were all alive, but they were all exhausted from the battle. These old guys wanted to follow them, but they were stopped by Rubens with good intentions. In short, when Rubens walked into the church, the first thing he saw were the remaining 12 cardinal bishops who were seriously injured and in a sorry state. Most of them were political enemies who had tried to suppress Rubens. But now, they looked at him and could not say a word. They almost lost the Holy Cathedral, because they had underestimated the enemy, but the inner city was now full of soldiers brought by Benjamin. That was the main reason why they did not dare to speak. Why did Rubens's troops come in such a strange way? Why did he suddenly leave before the enemy attacked? Why did he, coincidentally, rush into the city with so many troops when the enemy was attacking? It was not easy for so many troops to come from the Bogdo parish. Even if Benjamin, the district bishop, gave the order, it would take at least 3 to 5 days in advance. But these questions were no longer important, because in a power struggle, only the result mattered. No one cared about the process. The so-called process could be explained with any lame excuses after the dust had settled, because they all understood that the power structure of the Rose Cross would completely change from now on. Rubens still calmly greeted them and continued to walk forward. He passed through the familiar corridor and arrived in front of the Pope's small house. The inner servant who had delivered the message for him in the morning had been killed. Now, there was only a priest with bloodstains on his face standing guard outside the house. When he saw Rubens, his lips trembled and he wanted to speak, but Rubens raised his hand to stop him. "Let me see His Holiness." There was no more delivering the message. Rubens pushed the door open and entered, leaving behind the stiff-faced priest who wanted to stop him. He knew that it was best to be an idiot at a time like this. The heavily injured Pope's face was pale, but it was not so serious that he could not get out of bed. He sat on a simple armchair in front of the window and looked at Rubens with dim eyes. He quietly listened to him briefly describe the process of recovering the Holy Cathedral. He did not show any dissatisfaction at Rubens entering without the inner servant's message. "You mean the 2 elders of the Viper Cross were killed on the spot? Who did it?" The Pope felt that things were more complicated than he had imagined. He could not think of anyone who could kill the enemy's commander and generals in such a situation. But Rubens's answer made him hold his breath. Chapter 644. The room fell into silence. After a long time, the Pope said with difficulty, "Those villages outside the city. I will not let any of them go if they have to pay the price. The soldiers in the city. Ifta's Knight Wellington will lead the reinforcements here tomorrow." Rubens's answer made the Pope completely dispirited. He leaned against the back of the chair and waved his hand. Okay. I'll leave the rest to you. Take care of yourself, Your Holiness." Rubens's expression was calm and almost cold. He turned around and walked out of the stone house. He looked at the priest who was still standing there and said, "The battle in the city has subsided. You can go back and rest. Your Holiness will have a new servant to take care of you." Yes, Cardinal Bishop." Looking at the back of Rubens, the priest swallowed his saliva. When he looked back, he found that there were already 4 unfamiliar temple guards standing around the Pope's house. He knew that this was not a place where he should be. He did not even have the courage to go in and greet the Pope. He lowered his head and hurriedly left. Obviously, everyone knew who the city listened to now. At the same time, Kelda Duck's figure was already flying west. Elder Weiss used the power of the scroll to grow a pair of wings. Although he quickly escaped from the battlefield, he still could not escape from Roddy's pursuit. On one side was an assassin who flapped his wings for the first time, and on the other side was a high-level magical beast that had been strengthened. The answer was obvious. However, Roddy was not in a hurry to act. He followed the enemy until there was no one around, then he raised his bow and arrow and started to attack. If it was on land, Elderweiss had countless ways to dodge. But he did not know how to roll in the air to dodge. When he saw the arrow coming, he immediately tried to lower his flying altitude and tried to dive into the forest below to avoid it. However, he underestimated the change in air resistance when he dived down. He lost control and crashed into a giant tree in the forest. In the process of rolling, he was shot in the back by Roddy's arrow. When he fell to the ground, his neck was broken. He could not be more dead. Roddy immediately took the scepter from him, and then studied Elderweiss' body for a while. The man's arms had completely transformed into wings, and when he observed them up close, Roddy suddenly felt that they looked somewhat familiar. But after looking at it for a long time, he still couldn't remember where he had seen it, so he plucked out a few feathers and burned the corpse to ashes with flames. Then, he dug a hole and buried it with magic. In this deep forest, he wasn't afraid that anyone would be able to find him. To Rose Cross, the Viper's Kiss had been snatched away by the enemy. To the Viper Cross, Elvis had completed his mission, but he never returned. Where did the scepter go? This question would become a historical mystery. Even if someone guessed that Roddy had taken the scepter, he could just say, "I didn't catch up with Elderweiss," and he would be able to clear himself of all responsibility. This was Dead Men Tell No Tales. If you say that I took it, go and confirm it with Elvis, who knew if he coveted the power of the scepter, took it away for himself, and hid his identity. Roddy looked at the dark horizon in the distance, and his gaze swept over the map pane. Then, he began to control the slightly agitated Kelda duck to descend. Flying at top speed, it took less than an hour and a half to reach Hollier City from the Holy Cathedral. However, Roddy wasn't at ease along the way, because the Viper's Kiss scepter had affected both him and Kelda duck mentally. With the mark of the Dragon Slayer, Roddy was basically immune to this kind of mental attack. He didn't have any emotional fluctuations, but the constant headache was quite annoying. Fortunately, the pain wasn't obvious with the Heart of the Exorcist, and it felt similar to the migraines caused by playing games all night. On the other hand, Kelda duck's emotions were unstable during the flight, causing it to deviate from the flight path. Fortunately, Roddy kept using the Heart of the Beast skill to increase the Kelda duck's mental resistance, and finally, they arrived at Hollier City without a hitch. Roddy's goal was simple. He wanted to give the scepter to its summoner, Sally. Roddy was very careful not to open the scepter wrapped in animal skin, but he knew that the scepter was actually a soulbound item, just like the ring. Under such circumstances, only Sally could use the scepter. Even Pope Peter couldn't do anything about it. However, with the divine weapon in hand, Roddy didn't plan to spread the news. One could only be a thief for 1,000 days, but how could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? If he immediately announced that the Viper's Kiss was in EFTA, who could guarantee that the Viper Cross wouldn't launch a surprise attack on Hollier City like this time? Only when the Viper Cross was completely dealt with, would Roddy make Sally admit that she was the wielder of the scepter. Making a fortune in silence was the hard way. In the study room of the ducal palace, Sally was staring at the map in front of her in a daze under the bright crystal light. Once upon a time, there was only the map of EFTA placed here. At that time, the people who were pointing at it were Viceroy Rubens, her father Ongmar, and that inconspicuous little scout. But now, it had been replaced with a map of the Kingdom of Karen. Looking at the rose cross symbol marked by the Holy Cathedral on the map, her heart couldn't calm down. Because communication was not developed, she still hadn't received any news from the Holy Cathedral. The cleansing day planned by Roddy was today, and Knight Wellington had already set off after gathering his troops. He would arrive at the Holy Cathedral tomorrow. A power reshuffle might be in progress now. According to what Roddy had said, he, who had been acting as a knight of the Holy Army, should have safely escaped, right? Just as she was lost in thought, the butler suddenly knocked on the door. Sally was stunned. "What's the matter?" Butler John had a strange look on his face. He looked back and whispered, the Prime Minister wants to talk to you." "Roddy wants to see me?" Sally didn't react for a moment. She thought it was a request for a meeting. She replied happily, "Is he coming to Hollier? Then go and arrange the welcoming ceremony." Before she could finish her words, she realized that she was wrong from Hardedeff's expression. She immediately screamed and jumped up from the chair like a spring. "He's here?" The Prime Minister said he's waiting for you in the storage room at the end of the first floor." Butler John also felt that this request was a little strange, so he explained, "I've specifically confirmed his identity. It's not an imposter. There are still some bloodstains on his leather armor. He said he just came from the Holy Cathedral. Be careful of the stairs." Before John could finish, he saw Sally run out of the study like a gust of wind. She lifted the corner of her dress and quickly went down the stairs. Her heart was both happy and anxious. She was happy because Roddy had come to Hollier and she could pester this guy for a while. She was anxious because of the bloodstains on Roddy's body that John mentioned. Chapter 645. With such complicated feelings, Sally went to the storage room at the end of the corridor on the first floor without thinking. She opened the door, and the moment she saw Roddy, her eyes became moist. That was because Roddy looked even worse than what Steward John had described him to be. As he had withstood a few rounds of shadow spells, and also suffered 2 shadow strikes, his leather armor was charred and torn open. It was a horrifying sight. Sally was distressed and wanted to say something, but she saw Roddy make a gesture to keep quiet, and then he closed the door with a click. Then he cast a silence enchantment to block all the sounds in the room. This behavior made Sally look serious. She knew that Roddy was cautious, but he did this in the ducal palace, which obviously meant that he had something important to say. But she didn't expect that Roddy didn't explain anything and directly handed over the stick on his back to her. "This is?" Sally looked puzzled. She didn't realize that in front of her was a real artifact that countless people coveted. "Don't tell anyone about this secret outside the house." Roddy looked at Sally and suddenly felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Perhaps no one in another time and space would think that this unknown girl in history would become an overlord with an artifact. As soon as the beast's skin was opened, Sally suddenly sensed an aura that calmed her heart and mind spread out. The viper's kiss with complicated patterns was very different from when Sally held it, so she still didn't recognize what it was. She reached out to hold the body of the staff, and the 3 snake heads suddenly opened up at the top, which made this duke's expression extremely interesting. She looked up at Roddy, her eyes full of disbelief. "Why is it here?" Before Roddy could answer, a surging power suddenly swept out from the scepter, and then it gently and firmly passed into Sally's body. Her long golden hair even fluttered because of the dense fluctuation, and at the same time, 2 golden rings appeared in her eyes. Sally involuntarily let out a long howl because of the power of the artifact. Thanks to the soundproof enchantment, she didn't alarm others. Then the 3 snake heads on the body of the scepter seemed to be alive, crawling from the tip of the scepter to Sally's arm along the body of the scepter. Under her surprised gaze, they turned into little streams of light and formed 3 complicated colored rings in the middle of her forearm. Since then, the 3 snake heads on the top of the scepter had been replaced by a triangular red crystal, and the magic patterns on the surface had completely disappeared. When Sally held the scepter, the body of the scepter had a kind of ivory luster. From the appearance, perhaps no one would recognize this scepter as the viper's kiss. Sally felt the full divine power in her body, and for a moment she could not believe it was real. Divine incantations were different from magic. As a priest, when Sally cast divine incantations, she would chant the scriptures to resonate with the God that the Rose Cross believed in, and rely on the resonance to achieve the effect of the divine incantation. Sorcerers, on the other hand, relied on directly controlling the elements in the air to create spells, so there was a fundamental difference between the two. But at this time, Sally could clearly feel the gentle power around her body, as if she could cast divine incantations at will with just a raise of her hand. She suddenly had a feeling that if she cast spells now, perhaps she would no longer need to wait for the resonance of the god. This was a sense of solidity that she could actually control the power. Sally was stunned for more than 10 seconds before she took a deep breath and looked up at Roddy. "You gave it to me. Did the Pope really agree?" "It doesn't matter whether the Pope agrees or not. As long as I agree, then it's fine." Roddy looked at the description of "Advanced to Level 35" above Sally's head, and he was actually very happy. But before he could say anything, Sally opened her arms, raised her head, and kissed him. He knew that Sally was using her actions to express her feelings, but the kiss was still a little long. The fragrance on Sally's body made him inexplicably have an urge to do something bad. He tried to steady his breath, but he saw that Sally's face was red, and she was paralyzed in his arms, panting, and her blurred eyes looked a little strange. Staring at Sally's eyes, Roddy suddenly felt that she actually gave him a strange mental pressure. This had never happened before. He let go of the girl in his arms and looked at her curiously. "Do you feel any changes?" After the scepter was completely awakened and integrated, Sally's temperament had changed a lot. But at this time, she had not yet adapted to the changes in her body. She only felt that everything around her seemed to be a lot clearer, and there seemed to be something extra in her mind. When she thought about it carefully, she suddenly felt a little dizzy. She staggered and was quickly supported by Roddy. "Everything else is fine, just a little dizzy." As Sally spoke, she raised her arm and looked at it. The lines of the 3 snakes had a kind of harmonious beauty, and it did not seem the least bit out of place. With a thought, she found that the lines actually emitted a faint light, but for a moment she did not know how to use this power. After a few seconds, she felt her eyelids become heavy, and her whole body fell into a state of drowsiness. Seeing this, Roddy knew that this might be some kind of sequela, so he removed the soundproof enchantment around her, and then called a maid to take care of her after a simple wash and sleep. At this time, Sally was so sleepy that she could not even lift her eyelids, but she still held on to Roddy's finger and did not let him leave. In this regard, Roddy could only change into the pajamas that Sally had already asked the servants to prepare, and lay on the bed with Sally in his arms. Seeing that he was lying beside her, Efteta Duke finally fell asleep peacefully, while Roddy silently covered her with the quilt, lowered his head to kiss Sally's forehead, and then closed his eyes at the side. The fierce battle and flight also made him extremely tired, and he fell asleep after a few minutes. While Roddy was lying comfortably on the big bed with Duke in his arms, Count Milner was experiencing the worst night of his life. Previously, after being placed under house arrest by Elder Dean, he could not leave his tent at all. Even when he went to the toilet, he was surrounded by at least 4 soldiers of the Viper Cross, and this situation was only alleviated when the sky turned completely dark. Count Milner did not know why, but when he heard the noises outside getting louder and louder, he walked out of the tent and found that the soldiers guarding him had already disappeared. Count Milner walked a few steps in shock, but he saw that there was a fire in the camp far away. He had always been in a state of isolation, so he had no idea what was happening outside. After running for about 200 meters, he found a subordinate in the somewhat empty camp and hurriedly asked, "Where's Dean? Where did those guys from the Viper Cross go?" The person who was stopped was a captain of the Knights. As soon as he saw Milner, he immediately said anxiously, "Sir Count, Elder Dean and Elder Claude were killed at the entrance of the Holy Cathedral. The knights from the Holy Army are completely in chaos. They are now wandering around and killing. Quickly organize the army to suppress them. Otherwise, we will all be affected when the riot starts." Why did they always say that the military camp was an important place? It was because the people here were all war machines. They were quick to kill and set fires, and even more quick to harm themselves when they lost control. Trying to stop the out-of-control army was no different from fighting a war. Now that the Viper Cross was leaderless, the original Church army had been crippled by the Rose Cross in the city, and now they were scattered soldiers. The originally unorganized and undisciplined Holy Army had completely turned into bandits. Originally, there were close to 10,000 of them, but in the afternoon battle, more than 7,000 of them participated in looting and fighting. When they received the news that the leader of the Holy Army, Cardinal Claude, had been defeated, this group of people became a virus that harmed everything. Regardless of whether it was a village or a town, the knights in groups started to burn, kill, loot without hesitation. Anyway, the soldiers of the Holy Cathedral would not come out to help at night, and there was no one to control Milner's troops now. Their minds were filled with the idea of leaving after this mission, and they destroyed the territory around the Holy Cathedral like a swarm of locusts. Not only did they attack the civilians, but even the small groups that had conflicts with each other started to kill each other. Milner had never seen such a scene before. When he knew that the 2 elders of the Viper Cross had died, his brain buzzed, and he almost fell to the ground. Then, he immediately asked the captain of the knights to gather the nobles who were originally moving together. After some questioning, Milner found out that most of the nobles had directly left with their troops in the afternoon. These nobles were not stupid. When they knew that the Church army had broken through the Holy Cathedral, they immediately knew that they had fallen into the trap that Milner had dug. No matter what the outcome was, if the royal family blamed them, they would definitely not be able to bear the consequences. Therefore, the nobles who knew how to play it safe cut off all relations with Milner. They did not care about how dangerous it was to travel in the middle of the night, and they all left the camp early. Milner was so angry that he almost crushed his teeth. He knew that he had been tricked by the Viper Cross, but he had not realized how big of a mess the Viper Cross had made. After gathering his army of more than 1,000 people, this naive count initially wanted to ask his subordinates to suppress the rebellion of the Church army, but he soon realized that it was all empty talk. The Church army had long collapsed, and everyone only wanted to take advantage of the situation. Who would have the mood to stay in the camp? It was not suitable to march after dark, let alone fight. Looking at the burning village in the dark, Milner could only sullenly order the soldiers to form a defensive formation to prevent themselves from being affected by the rebellion of the army. Originally, there were more than 10,000 people, and including the logistical auxiliary troops, there were more than 20,000 people. In just a day, there were only less than 2,000 people left. Even Milner himself did not understand what had happened. However, there was one thing that was already set in stone. The plan to attack Efta was completely ruined. Chapter 646. At dawn, the stench of blood near the gates of the Holy Cathedral did not dissipate. Instead, it grew thicker. After Rubens arrived, he took over the defense of the city and quickly recruited civilian, auxiliary troops to help with the defense. The corpses from the previous battle were moved elsewhere, but there was no time to clean up the congealed blood and minced meat on the ground because it was not safe outside the city walls. The soldiers on the city walls did not dare to rest for the night. Because it was late at night, there were a few Holy Army knights wandering around the city walls. Of course, they were not there to attack the city, but to search the corpses of the Holy Army guards at the city gates to see if there was anything else they could take. After daybreak, looking down from the city walls, one could see many naked corpses. Obviously, in this era where productivity was severely lacking, the bandits would not let go of anything valuable. Although many of them were knights, no one felt that they needed to follow the rules of a night when it was dark and windy. The Holy Cathedral was not attacked because of the city walls, but most of the villages and towns under the jurisdiction of the Holy Cathedral were covered in black smoke. This scene enraged the people in the Holy City. But when they remembered that none of the soldiers who left the city yesterday returned, it was obvious how cruel the enemy was. Now, the troops that Cardinal Rubens brought were only enough to defend the city walls. There was no extra troops to go out and clean up the bandit. Therefore, the people in the city all hoped that the Pope would issue a holy decree and gather the holy cathedral guards from various parishes to come to the rescue. However, to everyone's surprise, when the sky brightened, the north gate of the holy sanctum was opened all of a sudden. A group of 700 cavalrymen entered the city majestically, followed by over 2,000 infantry and a long convoy carrying emergency rations. The citizens of the city were excited, but after asking around, they realized that it was the reinforcement team sent by Duke Iferta. The leader was the Grand Knight under Duke Wellington. All this while, the Holy Cathedral, which was outside of Ifta's territory, had never allowed the nobles to bring their troops into the city. This time, the second group of reinforcements came from Duchess Sally. Ordinary people might not be able to tell the difference, but those who understood a little would immediately realize that this was a legitimate infiltration of forces. After the holy sanctum was ambushed by the enemy, there was no room for rejection. If Charles II's army were to arrive at this time, then the Rose Cross would be ruled by the royal family. But now that it was Sally's army that had arrived, then, the boundaries of Ifta's territory would probably have to be redrawn. He had no choice but to bow his head when he was under someone else's roof. But what surprised the commoners even more was that at noon, the Rose Cross announced a holy edict. Pope Peter confessed that the reason why the city almost fell was because the Church had underestimated the enemy, and that they bore the main responsibility for it. At the same time, he announced the number of priests, bishops, temple guards, and even grand cardinals who had sacrificed themselves in this battle. He also explained the fact that he was injured. After that, he expressed his sincere appreciation to Rubens and Benjamin for their timely support, as well as his sincere gratitude to Ifta, Duke, and Sally Lucifron. He also announced that the matters of the Rose Cross would be discussed and decided by the Grand Cardinals, and he would temporarily not participate in the decision-making due to his heavy injuries. After that, there was a series of pleasantries to reassure the people. But what this holy edict did not mention was that after today, the Grand Cardinals would undergo the largest personnel change in history. Other than the 3 who had died in battle, 5 Grand Cardinals withdrew from the core circle at the same time due to heavy injuries. Then, Benjamin and 2 other district bishops who originally belonged to Rubens' faction joined the Grand Cardinals. Since then, more than 70% of the Grand Cardinals were staunch supporters of the Ifta faction. In the future, the right to speak for the Rose Cross would undoubtedly belong to Rubens. And sitting in this position, Rubens naturally knew who he should listen to. No matter how the core power level changed, the scattered bandit army wandering outside the Holy Temple was the current problem. So after the Holy Edict was issued, Knight Wellington, who had already rested and reorganized, immediately led the army to recover the lost villages. The bandits, who were already disorganized, could not fight against the regular army from Ifta. They were almost all taken down in one wave of attack. The troops that followed behind distributed emergency food to ensure that the villagers who had been robbed of their food would not starve to death. Such a series of measures made the impoverished farmers who were robbed very grateful. Under the propaganda of some people, they gradually knew that these soldiers were not the Holy Temple Guards of the Rose Cross, but reinforcements sent by Ifta Duke. These propagandas spread everywhere. As the saying goes, providing timely help is better than icing on the cake. After losing confidence in the Rose Cross, these refugees now knew that Ifta was the real savior of their plight. And these soldiers led by Knight Wellington obviously did not plan to return soon. Their mission was not just to disperse the Holy Army, knights who had lost their will to fight, but to station here in the name of protection, to stabilize the suddenly expanding borders of Ifta's territory. From now on, all the areas in the northern part of the kingdom where the Holy Temple was located had already been incorporated into the territory of Ifta. And in a small city in the eastern part of the kingdom, there were already scattered believers who brought the news of the defeat to the Viper Cross. The Viper Cross did not have the heritage of the Rose Cross because the religion appeared later, and its doctrine was born from the Rose Cross, so the architectural style here was quite similar to the Holy Temple. If there was one biggest difference, it would be the image of a viper carved on the building. The believer soldier who survived the battle was covered in sweat and mud. He was brought to the center of the church, and in front of the Pope, the other 4 cardinals and the 6 elders, he told the news of Claude and Dean being killed by a guy who appeared out of nowhere. His intermittent words were mixed with unspeakable fear, and the faces of the people who were looking forward to the great news of victory suddenly turned ugly. The priesthood of the Viper Cross was slightly different from that of the Rose Cross. Under the Pope, the cardinals and elders were equal, but only the cardinals could participate in political decisions, and the elders were determined by strength and power. They belonged to the combat department and had the right to know, but not the right to make decisions. Pope Dai Zai's eyes were gloomy. He was wearing a white robe, sitting on a seat slightly higher than the others, and was silent. The cardinals and elders below were in an uproar over the news. Dean and Claude's strength was publicly recognized, and they had led their respective troops to attack according to the plan. How could they be killed by one person? Who did it? Is it really one person? What about Elvis's whereabouts? Someone asked, but Pope Dai Zai interrupted these unimportant details. There were too many strange things in this world, and no one would think that they were invincible. The stronger one was, the more they understood respect, so the deaths of Claude and Dean did not surprise him too much. The only thing he cared about now was the Viper's kiss. As for the vacancies of the elders and cardinals, there would always be someone to replace them. Your Holiness, Lord Elvis was forced to retreat by the guy with the bow and arrow. In the end, he used the scroll and escaped by flying. This sentence made the surrounding elders and cardinals heave a collective sigh of relief. Escaping by flying meant that he used the ancient scroll. Everyone present was very clear about the effects of the scroll, so they naturally thought that Elvis had successfully taken away the Viper's kiss. Pope Dai Zai was also relieved. What he needed to do now was to wait for Elvis's return. Once he regained control of the scepter, the Viper Cross could be completely revived and ruthlessly trample on the Rose Cross. But before that, Pope Dai Zai still had a lot of things to deal with. In his opinion, the aftermath and the battle were actually equally important, because the Viper Cross absolutely could not admit that this war was started by them alone, and the only thing he needed to do now was to push the blame onto Count Milno. When Elvis returns, bring him to the baptism room. That's what he deserves. The baptism room was the main reason why the Viper Cross was able to attract a large number of powerful masters. Those who could enter the baptism room for a day would have their strength greatly increased after coming out, and some could even break through the threshold and become a powerful existence that ordinary people could not resist. But the baptism room was under the control of the Pope, and became a reward that everyone wanted. The Pope heaved a sigh of relief, feeling a lot more relaxed. He only said in a low voice, "As long as Elvis is fine. I believe in his loyalty." On the 5th of July, the gates of the Holy Cathedral that had been closed for many days finally opened. This was because the bandit suppression operation, carried out by Wellington and the Holy Cathedral Guards, was a huge success. The Holy Army that was wandering around the Holy Cathedral and the Church Army that the Viper Cross left behind when they fled had basically been annihilated or expelled. At the same time, more than 300 bandits who participated in robbing the villages were captured alive and were escorted into the Holy Cathedral gates. According to the original method, after the bandits were defeated by the knights, they would basically be killed on the spot to prevent future troubles. In this era where the Lord is greater than the heavens, and the rules of the church are everything, there was basically no unified law or regulation. But under Roddy's orders, these bandits were obviously suitable material for a political show. Chapter 647. Zack and the other knights could have left the battlefield the moment the city gates were closed. But because of greed, they did not stop while they were ahead. Therefore, when the people around them began to plunder unscrupulously, these fellows who were hoping to get lucky joined in. Who knew that when the warhorses were exhausted, they would soon be captured in the subsequent operation to suppress the bandits. Now that he was a prisoner, Zack was no longer as powerful as he was in the past. He did not have much regret now, and his mind was full of thoughts on how to raise the ransom. Zack had the identity of a knight. Even though the nobleman who granted him the title had died on the battlefield, his identity was real. In this era, when a knight was captured, he could be redeemed by ransom. Therefore, after the rotten egg hit his face, the knight, who boasted of his abilities, did not forget to stare coldly at the civilians around him, as if he wanted to remember these people who had insulted him. Zack was tall and towering, and his stare did indeed scare many people. But before he could stare more than a few times, Knight Efta, who was riding on a warhorse beside him, whipped his head. Smack! Amidst the loud sound, a bloody mark appeared on Zack's face. The knight beside him pointed at Zack and scolded, "What are you looking at? Are you asking for a beating?" Zack did not dare to raise his head from the burning pain. He knew that there was no point in throwing a tantrum now, so he could only swallow his anger. He cursed the knight in his heart and swore to teach him a lesson after he was ransomed. But just as he was thinking about how to take revenge, he felt an inexplicable fear in his heart, because he remembered the seemingly harmless Roddy on the battlefield, but in the end, he killed 2 elders of 2 teams by himself. His godly archery skills were beyond his imagination. When he thought about how such a terrifying person could endure all kinds of humiliation in order to hide his identity, Zack's body trembled uncontrollably. Who is he? An elite of the Rose Cross? Zack still did not know who Roddy was, but just as the prisoner team went deeper into the city, they heard the conversation of the civilians around them. "Did you watch today's Age of Cullen? Big news. I can't read. I can't understand it. Hurry up and tell me." Paper newspapers had basically become common after more than 10 paper mills had been built in Ifta. However, after the 4th issue of Cullen's Era, they started to pay for it. There were fewer people on the streets with newspapers. The farmers in the village were not willing to spend money to buy newspapers, but for the people living in Sanctum City, the price of newspapers was still cheap. In order to get fresh news from all over the kingdom, they did not mind spending a few copper coins. After all, spreading the latest news to the illiterate around them would give them a sense of superiority and satisfaction. Most of this issue is about the Holy Sanctum. The higher-ups have described the course of the battle over the past few days. They even calculated the casualties of all the villages. The newspapers are saying that this is all a conspiracy by the Viper Cross. Their ambush has destroyed the lives of all the villages and towns within the Holy Sanctum's perimeter, and the one who led them, Count Milner, is even more shameless. Roddy's newspaper targeted the Viper Cross and Count Milner. It did not mention anything about the royal family, so the people's hatred was immediately focused on these 2 forces. Coupled with the bloody numbers and the description of the scene, it was likely that the people in the kingdom would feel disgusted with them. These damned heretics! If it wasn't for the powerful Holy Sanctum Guard who killed the 2 leaders of the enemy, the entire city would have been destroyed. Hearing someone say this, Zack turned his head slightly. He knew that the powerful Holy Sanctum Guard was Raphael. So, he was a spy of the Rose Cross? But the person who was narrating the newspaper mocked. What Holy Sanctum Guard? You guys have guessed wrong. Do you know that? The two leaders of the Viper Cross were Cardinal Claude and Elder Dean. Both of them were extremely powerful. They could destroy an entire Holy Sanctum Guard with a wave of their hands. As for the archer who killed them, you guys will never guess who it is. Who? Did the newspaper say who he is? The suspense immediately attracted the attention of the people around them. Even Zack and the captured knights around him turned their heads. The entire group even slowed down their pace. It's the Prime Minister of Ifta's cabinet, Lord Roddy. Ah! How is that possible? The crowd instantly went into an uproar, but after that they all fell into silence. The name Roddy had actually entered their ears a long time ago. It was just that this place was far from Ifta, and the rumors about him were not adapted into stories by the bards. So, for a moment, no one connected it to this Prime Minister, who had powerful archery skills. But this time, Cullen's era directly admitted that it was Roddy who killed Dean and Claude. After carefully thinking about the old rumors, people silently agreed to this fact. Didn't Lord Roddy lead a team to kill over 100 orcs? Yes, didn't they say that he went to the Tasman Kingdom and killed Emperor Augustine? Yes, didn't they say that he went to the Tasman Kingdom and killed Emperor Augustine? He even killed the powerful undead monarch. What can Dean and Claude do? As Zack was pushed forward by the crowd, he could not hear the conversation clearly. But at that moment, he was like all the knights around him. Their mouths were wide open in horror. Beside him, a fellow who had mocked Roddy before stuttered, He really is the Prime Minister of Ifta? I don't think so, no matter how I look at him. Zack shut his mouth. He really did not want to say anything now. It was precisely because no one had seen through the loophole that he felt this Prime Minister was terrifying. Suddenly he felt uneasy. He turned his head to look at the surrounding knights with the Ifta symbol on their armor. He swallowed and could not help but think of a question. Would Roddy be a very vengeful person? Would he list all of them as people who needed special treatment? No, probably not. The Holy Temple was the main place where the Rose Cross preached their doctrine. Zack knew that this sect was very particular about benevolence, and the God of Light will forgive all sins. As a knight, how could he be severely punished by them? This was the deep-rooted mentality of the hierarchy. If a commoner broke the law, they would be punished according to the laws set by the Lord. If a knight or a noble broke the law, there would be another set of standards to deal with them. Because they were the privileged class and ruling class, in most battles in the Kingdom of Karen, knights and even squires of knights would be captured alive if they could. This was because they could be exchanged for a large sum of money, and no one would reject it. With this thought in mind, these 300 people who were captured came to the square of the Holy Temple. At that moment, the powerful Grand Knight Wellington was standing on a temporary wooden platform. Because he participated in the battle to suppress the bandits, his armor was stained with blood. His murderous aura made the knights of the Holy Army at the scene quiet out of fear. Most of them lowered their heads, but most of them were curious about why they were here. They did not understand why they had to build a wooden platform here. Wellington stood there like a statue without saying a word. The whole scene was very depressing. Even the surrounding commoners only dared to whisper. Not long after, Cardinal Rubens came from the inner city with a group of people. He was wearing a red robe and holding a holy decree. He read out the decision of the Pope and the cardinals. The main idea was as follows. As the combat force was mainly made up of Ifta soldiers, the Rose Cross expressed their gratitude and voluntarily gave up the right to dispose of all the prisoners of war. The current leader of the Ifta army, Wellington, will judge all the crimes of the prisoners of war. As soon as the words came out, the whole crowd started discussing. This was the Holy Temple City. Why did it suddenly have to be decided by Ifta's people? But everyone could see that this was a strong political signal. With this precedent, it meant that in the future, the Holy Temple would gradually follow Ifta's lead. Who knew if in a few years, It would be Ifta's law that was enforced here. Wellington had the style of a soldier. He was very direct and decisive. He took over the holy decree, turned around and said loudly, robbing, raping, killing civilians, burning down villages. According to Ifta's law, kill. As soon as the word kill was said, the square that was buzzing with discussion instantly became so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. The Ifta knights who were fully armed stepped forward and pulled the confused, holy army, knights onto the wooden platform. They raised their swords and heads rolled. You can't do this. Looking at the 3 to 5 meters of blood spurting out of the neck, the bandits immediately panicked. They wailed and wanted to run, but how could they run with their hands tied? After being knocked down by the weapons of the guards beside them, they were dragged onto the platform one by one and continued to kill until the sky turned dark. Zack's body trembled. He could not understand why Ifta would do this, but Wellington could not be bothered to think about what these people were thinking. A row of 30 people chopped off the heads of these 300 people. This was truly a river of blood. The stench of blood on the wooden stage caused the onlookers' faces to turn deathly pale. Many people vomited on the spot. However, as these people were all killed, cheers gradually spread out. In the end, the heads were piled up into a mountain, and the cheers were all over the place. Well done. Long live Ifta. These damned bastards. Good kill. These 300 heads were not only a demonstration to the Viper Cross and Count Milner, but to Rubens, who had a deeper understanding of the situation. It was more like the prelude to a huge revolution. Chapter 648. Compared to the bloody scene in the Holy Cathedral, Roddy, who was enjoying his life in Hollier City, was absolutely carefree. Sally, who was mentally exhausted due to the power of the scepter, was back to normal after waking up. However, when she opened her eyes and saw Roddy lying beside her, she was a little reluctant to get up. So, this Lord Duke simply pretended to be unconscious and murmured a few words in a daze. Then, like a kitten, she curled up in Roddy's arms, closed her eyes blissfully and continued to sleep. Of course, Roddy was aware of this, but only a fool would expose it at this time. He continued to close his eyes, maintaining his position with his hand on Sally's waist, inhaling the fragrance of her breath, enjoying the rare peaceful life. Sally lay down for a while and saw that Roddy did not move. She wanted to take a mile after taking an inch. She pretended to lie down casually, but accidentally let Roddy's hand press on her lower abdomen. Even in her pajamas, Sally immediately felt the heat of his palm. This strange heat seemed to spread along her lower abdomen, making her feel inexplicably a little hot. When she opened her eyes, she found that Roddy had been looking at her all along. "Aya. You bad guy." Sally pouted, but she comfortably snuggled into Roddy's arms. "You only know how to bully me." "I didn't do anything." Roddy had an innocent look on his face. After that, he realized that not doing anything was the real bullying. He coughed twice and raised his hand. Sally's body suddenly stiffened and then softened. She bit her lips and looked at Roddy. She looked like she was trying to hold back, but was unwilling to speak. She looked very stubborn. Seeing this, Roddy suddenly had the urge to teach this little girl a lesson. As a result, Sally's cheeks became redder and redder. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore and bit Roddy's neck. She whimpered, "What? What about the wedding?" Sally's voice was so sweet that Roddy couldn't take it anymore. He was afraid that he would turn around and do her on the spot, so he quickly withdrew his hand and pretended to be calm. "I'm going to Lassyman soon. I'll settle things there and then do it when I come back. How about it? Now that the Rose Cross has been taken down, Charles II will probably suffer in silence." "Humph! Don't go back on your word when the time comes," Sally said arrogantly, but the changes in her body made her blush. At this time, she no longer pretended to be asleep. She got up and ran into the bathroom while Roddy was not paying attention. Even so, Roddy still saw her bright red ears. That's what you get for provoking. Roddy felt that he had watched so many educational films. No matter what, he had a wealth of theoretical knowledge. Compared to most people in this era, he was definitely an old driver. Wouldn't it be easy to deal with this little Duke? However, this thought was just a thought. He got up and stretched his body. Looking at the scenery outside the window, he knew that he had a lot of things to do. But these 2 days, I'll just take it as a vacation. While he was lost in thought, Sally's scream suddenly came from the bathroom. Roddy's expression changed. He rushed to the bathroom as if he had teleported, only to find that Sally was looking down at the 3 little snakes lying on her arm. The snake's head was the original shape of the Viper's Kiss scepter. At this time, it was condensed by the elements and looked lifelike. Or rather, it looked like it had come to life. It's okay, it's okay. It scared me just now. I can feel that it doesn't mean any harm. Sally's mind was full of thoughts that made her blush. She had almost forgotten the fact that she had fused with the scepter. So when she saw the 3 snakes suddenly appear, she was shocked. But she quickly felt the connection between the 3 snakes and herself, so she hurriedly called out to stop Roddy. Roddy looked at the snakes and then looked at Sally. After confirming through the various data and status bars that she was indeed fine, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he immediately noticed a fact that he had overlooked just now. Sally's complexion and skin were much better than before. She was full of spirit and exuded vitality. Obviously, the benefits that the artifact's scepter had brought her were far more than just a simple increase in level. Moving closer to take a look, Roddy found that the 3 little snakes looked really pleasing to the eye. They did not have any particularly bright color differences, but each had a different tongue and scale pattern. This is Electo, this is Mergala, and this is Tisiphone. These names were engraved in Sally's mind by the artifact, so she could easily distinguish them. But just when Roddy wanted to take a closer look, the 3 little snakes collectively retreated a distance, then turned into 3 rays of light, and changed back into the pattern on Sally's arm. They felt that the aura on your body was scary, so they hid. Sally blinked and looked at Roddy curiously. What did you do this time? I haven't seen you for a while, and you've become so powerful that even they are afraid of you. Although she was curious, Sally's tone had a hint of admiration. The man she had fallen in love with was so powerful, of course she was happier than anyone else. Roddy also couldn't tell what was so scary about his aura. He thought for a moment, then took out Merlinsera's dragon crystal and shook it. Maybe it has something to do with dragons? But let's not talk about this. What's your plan for today? My plan is to catch you and not let you go. Sally laughed and threw herself into Roddy's arms. Of course, they had to enjoy their rare vacation time. After washing up, the 2 happily enjoyed a delicious meal in the mansion and tasted the red wine from the wood elf village. Then, they changed into gorgeous robes and walked into the opera house to watch an opera with a group of nobles. The scene of the Prime Minister and Lord Duke going out together immediately attracted the attention of the nobles, but everyone saw how cute and helpless Sally was with Duke, so they didn't disturb them too much. Instead, the noblewomen with perfume and rouge were all surprised by Sally's appearance and temperament today. They all discussed sourly, which made Roddy laugh. Opera at this time hadn't developed a proper model yet. The plot was old-fashioned, the tone was monotonous, and the performance was very primitive. Although the actors were adept at reading their lines and trying their best to express their emotions, in Roddy's eyes, it still felt like he was listening to an old-fashioned Beijing opera on the radio. Perhaps one day, when the technology was mature, he could become the boss of a film company and organize a few production teams to tour around. It seemed like a good idea. Of course, right now, Roddy didn't have the time for that. After watching the opera, Sally knew that she had to take care of Roddy, so she brought him to the racetrack to watch the horse racing. For nobles, horse racing was one of the most popular sports for men. This could be seen from the waves of cheers they heard when they entered. The two of them were led directly to the VIP seat. When Roddy walked past, he found that the nobles around him were much quieter than before. Some of them even unconsciously moved further away. Presumably, they had watched the news of Cullen's era and finally understood how terrifying Roddy's strength was. Sally held hands and followed behind him. After sitting down, she naturally held onto Roddy's arm and refused to let go. Her sweet and happy smile showed how happy she was now. And Roddy really felt that horse racing was more interesting than opera. But when he looked at the galloping horses on the racetrack, his mind was filled with the roaring sound of an F1 car engine. The manufacturing and improvement of cars would probably be completed soon. Even if they were to be mass-produced, the first batch could only be trucked. After all, transportation was the greatest contribution that cars could make to society. When would there be a racetrack here? Roddy looked at the strong horse that rushed past the finish line, a little lost in thought. In Elson City, all the projects and plans were carried out step by step. The first standardized road had been paved, and the speed of carriages traveling from the city to the small town outside the city was more than twice as fast as before. As the arcane puppets continued to expand their territory, this road would probably soon connect to the nearest noble city and form a road network. Looking down from the Pasha Magic Tower, one could see that the forest surrounding the city had been cut down. Half a year ago, there were very few people on the main road, but now it was bustling with people. Caravans came in and out one after another. Perhaps these people would never have thought that a city built in the most remote corner of the kingdom could be as prosperous and lively as a port city. Merlin Sarah was standing in front of the window and staring blankly down. She quickly turned around and looked at Naife, who was walking up to her with a questioning look. "Sister Merlin Sarah, I wanted to come and see your high heels. They look so good on you. I also want to customize a pair for my mother." Her words sounded reasonable, but how could it be so simple? Naife was a little mischievous. She had to travel with Merlin Sarah on the way to the Lockman Kingdom, so she, who would never take the initiative to greet Merlin Sarah, came to get close to her. A foreign country was not like Elson City, where her mother could protect her. If she didn't want to be a burden to Roddy, she had to find more protection first. Naife knew this better than anyone else. "High heels? If you want to see them, I have to go back and change them. But if you want to customize them, you'd better ask Roddy. Only he knows how to make them." Speaking of this pair of shoes, Merlin Sarah couldn't help but feel like she was showing off. After all, Roddy had never given them to Akasha, so they were definitely a unique gift. It didn't matter to Merlin Sarah whether they had magic effects or not. What made her most happy was that they looked good. After putting on the high heels, Merlin Sala felt as if she was walking with a different aura. During this period of time, she wanted nothing more than to wear these high heels every single day. "I don't dare to trouble you, sister. I'll take a look at them when it's almost time to sleep." Chapter 649. His head is full of weird ideas. I don't know what he's up to. Marinsara shook her head. Naife looked around and whispered, "Should we go and have a look? I want to see it, but I'm afraid that Mom will say something. Your mom really cares about everything. Roddy doesn't even know any advanced spells. What else can he do?" Marinsara rolled her eyes. She had always thought that Roddy was not good at spells, so the things he came up with must not be very technical. Therefore, she didn't want to see it. In her eyes, paper making and movable type printing were very simple things that were not as technical as advanced spells. But there were some unexpected surprises when these things were put to use. Marinsara was actually quite curious about what new things Roddy would come up with. Naife's words immediately gave her a reason to step down. She coughed and raised her hand. "But I have nothing to do today, so I don't mind going with you." Okay. Okay. Naifei's eyes were full of slyness. She followed Marinsura downstairs with light step. The middle floor of the magic tower was the laboratory of the research department, which was not open to outsiders. However, the people around them pretended not to see Marinsura and Naifei. After all, one was the daughter of the guardian, and the other was a senior sorcerer who fought side by side with Roddy. They were powerful and influential, so it would be suicidal to chase them away. The research on the preservative can was almost finished. There were many rows of canned fruits in the comparison group. The canned fruits in the front smelled pretty good. Naifei curiously moved closer and asked, "I heard that this can prolong the storage time of food. Are they saving it for winter?" "I think they're eating it at sea." Marinsura was very knowledgeable. She picked up the can and had a look. Ships usually don't dock for several months, so the food of the sailors and crew is usually very bad. I remember there is a story that sailors only eat biscuits at night. They don't eat them during the day. Why? Is there anything special at night? Naifei really didn't know. What a strange asterisk. A mischievous smile appeared on Marinsura's face as she said, "That's because those biscuits are as hard as rocks, and some of them have been there for many years, so they're always full of maggots. We eat them at night so that we can't see them, so we can't worry about them. Just take a few bites to get rid of the maggots, and then stuff the rest into our mouths regardless of whether there are any." Ugh! Naifei was so scared that her beautiful face turned pale. She turned around and covered her mouth. It took her a long time to recover. Marinsula laughed out loud. She had lived for so long, how could she not know what this little girl was thinking? However, Naifei wasn't harboring evil intentions. She was happy to tease the little girl. Naifei patted her chest and knew that she was no match for Roddy. She stuck out her tongue and said, "Brother Roddy is probably afraid that we won't have anything good to eat on the ship, so he developed this kind of thing. Roddy is quite ambitious. With these cans of food, whether it's wilderness exploration or long-distance navigation, the survival rate of ordinary people will be greatly increased. He wants to explore deeper and wider seas." Marinsura sighed inwardly. To be honest, in her eyes, canned food didn't require much technology. However, because of its low technology, it could be quickly popularized and applied, so that more people could experience the changes it brought. It was the same with paper and printing, and it was also the same with canned food. Thinking of this, she seemed to understand why Roddy did this kind of research. Research that could benefit the whole city and even the whole country was truly outstanding research. The two of them curiously walked past some of the research labs, from the smelting of various kinds of metals to the research on a kind of soil that could be used as a binding agent. They seemed to be able to see the tip of the iceberg of Roddy's ambition. When they arrived at the automobile research department, the prototype with the wooden shell immediately attracted their attention. The wooden shell was handmade by the best carpenters in Eiffel, and it had a very amazing curve. Although the prototype had a three-wheeled structure, the body plan was designed by Roddy to look like a formula car. It had low wind resistance, a low cockpit, and exposed tires. From the side, the prototype had a very typical shape of an F1 car, and the large rear wing was the standard feature of an advanced racing car. The wooden shell was brushed with several layers of tung oil, and it was polished until it was shiny. The sparrow-eye wood grain on it was extremely gorgeous. Marinsura and Naifei didn't expect that Roddy could come up with such an artistic thing. The two of them were mesmerized for a moment. After all, this thing was unprecedented, and it was a product that surpassed the times. It made people feel an inexplicable sense of awe. When Naifei saw the leather sports seat in the cabin, her eyes lit up. She looked around and asked the nervous researcher beside her, who was afraid that they would damage something, "Is this for sitting? Can I sit in it?" "Of course you can, but don't press those buttons. That will activate the magic circle, and the car will run away." Naifei wasn't a naughty child. Although she was an eccentric girl, she wouldn't dare to cause trouble. After asking seriously a few times, she carefully lifted her skirt and sat on the seat. Marinsura, who was watching the car sink, raised her eyebrows. She had never seen a carriage with shock absorbers and suspension. She reached out her hand to press the body of the carriage, and found that the body of the carriage, which was parked on the ground, actually swayed when she exerted force. This design is interesting. She knew that this design meant that the carriage could filter out a lot of vibrations and bumps. However, she felt that the magic wave was very familiar. She walked to the rear wheel and looked down. She immediately exclaimed, "Cobalt gold? This prodigal Roddy used so much cobalt gold to make a carriage." The researcher beside her was sweating. He wanted to explain that it was Roddy's order, but after thinking that it wouldn't be good for either side, he decided to keep quiet. Naife was holding on to the handlebars and looking left and right. When she heard Marinsura's exclamation, she turned around and smiled. "Isn't prodigal something Sister Akasha would say? Come on, Akasha doesn't care how much money Roddy spent. This kind of thing should be your mother's concern." The little girl was clearly a far cry from Marinsula's, and she immediately gave a mischievous chuckle as she said, "Big brother Roddy must have a reason for doing this. I think he's probably trying to scam someone again, so he's doing this on purpose. TSK, you really know him. This guy is full of evil tricks. Those who want to take advantage of him usually end up in a miserable state." Both of them were deeply touched by this topic, and they immediately laughed out loud. Naife touched the smooth body of the carriage and joked, "Big brother Roddy has only been out for a week, and I heard that the Viper Cross and the royal family are in a miserable state. Poor Emperor, I guess he still doesn't understand why he was taken advantage of. Charles II? If you ask me, I think it's enough for him to be an idle noble lord. Conquering someone needs to be done by someone with brains." One was an old man who had lived for thousands of years, and the other was a 15-year-old little lowly. The two of them were talking about the same topic without any awkwardness. This strange scene made Camilla, who was on the other side of the city, not know whether to laugh or cry. However, when she thought about what they were talking about, she felt like joining in the discussion. That guy really seemed to have some kind of strange magic power. In the Cullen Palace, Emperor Charles II, who was being discussed by Marinsura and Naife, was indeed a little confused. What happened to attacking Ifta? What happened to conquering the outer city in a month? The menu for the celebration banquet had already been finalized. Why did someone suddenly come and tell him that the army was defeated? It was one thing for the Legion to collapse, but it was not because of the attack on Ifta, but because of the attack on the Holy Cathedral. Charles II wanted to look through the attachment of the order he had given. Did he order Milner to attack the Rose Cross because he had too much to drink? Duwyden, are you saying that all of this was caused by Milner's mistake? I can't figure out what kind of mistake could make his army change its route and charge into the city of the Holy Cathedral. Until now, the Cullen era had not appeared in the palace, so Charles II's intelligence source was basically the sporadic feedback from the front line. His intelligence system was far inferior to the Cullen era. Until now, he didn't even know that the Pope was heavily injured and the two elders of the Viper Cross were killed by Roddy. To put it bluntly, this was a barrier that Milner had set up to achieve his own goals. When he was in power, no one dared to expose this fact. However, now that his army was defeated, Earl Duwyden immediately seized the opportunity to overthrow him. Your Majesty, the specific information about the war is very clear. Actually, Lord Milner has concealed a lot of things. Logically speaking, he shouldn't expose Earl Duwyden's shortcomings directly. He should at least have a confidant to start the conversation. However, Earl Duwyden had just joined the core circle and was considered a lone figure among the nobles in the hall. There was no ally who was willing to be the vanguard for him, so he had to personally take all the Cullen-era newspapers that had been published so far and raise them in front of Charles II with both hands. "What is this?" Charles II reached out and took the newspapers. He looked around and found that the nobles who usually had different expressions on their faces all lowered their head. This made him feel that something was wrong. Chapter 650. Charles II ignored the silence of the surrounding nobles and began to read. The content of the first newspaper was the most recent issue detailing the beginning and end of the war against the Holy Cathedral. The words on the front page made Charles II frown deeply. At first, he did not believe that it was true, but after carefully looking at the other contents of the newspaper, he found that it was actually the work of the Elson newspaper. Is there really any objective content for this kind of thing? Charles II was not stupid. From the perspective of a ruler, if he was the editor of this newspaper, he would definitely praise the greatness of the royal family and the stability of the people's lives. At the same time, he would also criticize the darkness of the enemy forces. Therefore, in his opinion, he was not surprised that more than 80% of the newspaper's content was fabricated. However, although he said so, his heart was still burning with anger. Every issue of the newspaper had a date, and he could easily see when the earliest issue was published. Regardless of whether the content was true or false, the fact that the emperor had only seen it now meant that there was a problem. "Your Majesty, the casualty statistics and the course of the war in this newspaper are basically true. I have verified it in many ways. Only..." Earl de Wyden was a little hesitant. Charles II was not in a good mood, so he frowned and said, "Just say it, don't beat around the bush." "Yes, yes, Your Majesty." The only unreliable piece of news was the participation of Prime Minister Rodi in the Eiffel Tower cabinet. It was said that he single-handedly defeated the 3 Viper Cross Guards and 2 elders. This was obviously an exaggeration to show off his personal strength. Charles II did not speak. At this moment, he was not thinking about whether Rodi was strong or not. Instead, he looked straight at de Wyden. "You mean, the other data in this newspaper are all true?" He had already seen the evaluation of Milner and the Viper Cross in the newspaper. Last night, Milner sent an urgent report saying that he had encountered the enemy and was currently in danger of retreating. If what the newspaper said was true, then Milner obviously did not know how to explain himself, so he was trying to find a reason to bluff his way through. "Your Majesty, the casualties and the course of the war are basically the same as the results of the investigation I sent people to investigate. The Viper Cross army suffered heavy losses, while the Holy Cathedral similarly lost a cardinal, an elder, and a large number of soldiers. In order to bring down Murnau, de Wyden had exhausted all his strength. However, he obviously did not train a specialized intelligence agency, so the news was lagging behind. Hence, he did not know that the Holy Sanctum was already under the control of Ifta's army. Charles II was the kind of person who did not get the latest news. After knowing this, he could not help but look around again. He finally understood why the nobles did not dare to look at him. It turned out that except for de Wyden, none of them dared to offend Milner. That was why he had been deceived like a deaf and blind person for such a long time. He really wanted to tear these newspapers apart and curse these nobles, but his rationality told him that it was meaningless. On the contrary, the solution to this matter was not to pursue who was responsible, but to make the whole thing smooth and reduce the losses at the same time. After taking a deep breath, Charles II's expression did not change at all. He said in a low voice, "Ask Milner to think of what he will say before coming to see me. Stop the attack on Ifta. From now on, everything will be focused on restoring order in the territory." This sentence was, in fact, announcing that Milner was the scapegoat. Although the war was started by the Viper Cross, he could not fall out with the Viper Cross now. The Rose Cross already had the tendency to side with EFTA. At this time, he could not push its opponent away. Charles II, who was trying his best to control his emotions, managed to stay calm until the end of the meeting. However, when he returned to the study room, he could not help but smash a teacup. After taking a deep breath, he sat back in the armchair and began to read the contents of the newspaper. On the last page of the latest issue of Karen's Era, there was a piece of news that made him feel that something was wrong. EFTA Civil Servant Examination. Regardless of one's background, as long as one passes the examination, one will be qualified to apply for all kinds of positions. Charles II's brows furrowed deeper. He could feel the danger hidden in this. However, this mechanism had only appeared in the selection process of the army. No one had ever applied it to a department with real power. In the world of the nobles, official positions were not for those who were capable, but for those who had a reliable family background. The Emperor of the Kingdom of Karen could not imagine what this examination that broke the boundaries between commoners and nobles would bring. While the Emperor was wondering about EFTA's various actions, the 8th issue of Karen's Era began to be sold on the streets. After the Battle of the Temple, the circulation of the newspaper had decreased significantly. Firstly, it was because of the fees, and secondly, there was no longer a need for comprehensive publicity. After all, paper was currently the most scarce commodity in EFTA. Even the old newspapers were now being bought with copper coins. This was because they found that the paper could be used again after being soaked in water to wash off the ink. They could make a lot of money by using it for a proper treatment. This phenomenon indeed reflected the thirst for paper in the southeastern part of the kingdom. However, unlike these small peddlers who only focused on making profits, Karen's Era and other weekly magazines had become fashionable reading materials that everyone in the upper class had to subscribe to. If one did not have the latest issue of the newspaper or magazine, it would be really embarrassing to discuss national affairs with others at a noble banquet. The noble mages, on the other hand, also had their eyes fixed on the recruitment pages of Magic and Karen's Era. As for the so-called Battle of the Temple, these mages had long known that the war would not happen. As the group with the highest IQ in the whole continent, if they could not even see the situation clearly, it would be more suitable for them to farm. They did not even want to read the news about Count Milner's defeat and escape on the front page. They basically just curled their lips and directly flipped over to read carefully about the surprising benefits of the positions in Elson City. There's finally news. Quick, look. What's it about? Quick, read it. In the magic tower of Krone, the Crown of Ice, a lab assistant rushed into the lab with the newspaper he had just bought. His exclamation immediately attracted the attention of a group of apprentices around him. Elson Magic Academy is now recruiting magic teachers. Any applicant who has passed the test for low rank, middle rank, and senior rank mages will be offered the position of lecturer in the Magic Academy. Lecturer's salary standard. The base salary is based on the test results, the commission is based on the teaching evaluation, and the bonus is calculated according to the student's test results at the end of each academic year. The minimum base salary for a low-rank lecturer is 2 gold coins, and for a senior-rank lecturer, 30 gold coins. At this point, a group of magic apprentices and assistants began to whisper. Because the newspaper had specifically popularized the concepts of base salary, commission, performance, bonus, and so on, they could quickly understand the concept after reading it. For example, a low-rank lecturer with a minimum salary of 2 gold coins a month, after taking into account the commission, performance, and bonus, it was possible for the average monthly salary to reach 3 gold coins or even 5 gold coins. How much can Sir Krone get if he goes? Someone couldn't help but ask curiously. They knew that the Cullen nobles gave a lot of resources every month. However, the resources were not for them but for Krone. After that, Krone would decide how much the apprentices and assistants under him could get. Putting aside the experimental funds and other necessary expenses, it was already not bad for a low-rank mage to get 2 gold coins a month in terms of salary. If they had more connections and could earn extra money, they could get more than 3 or even 5 gold coins a month. Therefore, Ifta's recruitment didn't sound very attractive. However, just as they were discussing it, the assistant holding the newspaper continued, "There's a special note at the back. All mages working in the Academy of Magic will receive magic points equivalent to the number of gold coins every month. Magic points can be used to rent laboratories, purchase rechargeable crystals, and borrow books from the library. At the same time, you can also obtain the corresponding academic level, based on the number of accumulated points. The higher the level, the more free resources you can use. There's also a note at the bottom. A low-rank rechargeable crystal only costs 5 points. Oh my god! So there are intermediate, high-rank, and maximum-rank rechargeable crystals? Really? The originally cold atmosphere suddenly heated up. They gathered around to ask for details, but unfortunately, the newspaper had limited space and did not write specific content. The group of mages suddenly had their imaginations running wild. What's wrong with Elson? Has Master Crone and the others always been using low-rank crystals? That should be the case. At the back, it says that only low-rank crystals are available for sale. Academic level is interesting. Does it mean that even if we can't become high-rank mages, we can still achieve a higher level through theoretical research and experience? If we have a solid theory and a few more papers published, will low-rank mages also be able to use the laboratories of high-rank mages for free? It seems like that's true. Really? Does Elson really have so many laboratories? Who knows? But just the fact that you can buy rechargeable crystals is enough to tempt many people, right? This was indeed the truth. After experiencing the benefits of the rechargeable crystal, the magic circle in the kingdom of Karen now knew about this magical crystal energy. However, Elson sold too few rechargeable crystals to the public. Many mages only heard about it but did not know about it. As a result, the few rechargeable crystals on the black market had been inflated from 45 gold coins to 850 gold coins. One had to know that this price was enough to buy a basket of ordinary magic crystal of the same size. But even so, after various experimental results proved the magic of the crystal, the price did not fall but continued to rise. Because of this extreme relationship between supply and demand, ordinary laboratory assistants and mages could not afford it at all. Chapter 651. It's not over yet. There's another recruitment after that. The guy holding the newspaper read it word by word. Elson Elementary School is recruiting teachers of all subjects. As long as you have basic mathematical knowledge and can spell, you have a chance to get a suitable position. The salary is not high. The basic salary ranges from 60 silver coins to 8 gold coins per month. The treatment was obviously not as high as that of a mage. After all, the elementary school only recruited ordinary people, and no formal mage would choose to apply for a job in such a place. However, the mage reading the newspaper had obviously ignored the feelings of the low-level assistants in the laboratory. These fellows who were not talented in magic and were likely to be stuck as a mage apprentice or a low-level mage for the rest of their lives were actually interested in this recruitment news. After all, the salary of a low-level assistant was only about 20 silver coins per month. They had actually received cultural education and basic magic education, but because they were at the bottom of the hierarchy in the magic tower, they belonged to the labor class without any suspense. Not only did they toil all day long, their monthly salary was also worlds apart from that of a formal mage. So, when the mages were discussing the positions in the Magic Academy, the silent assistants all looked at each other, wondering if they should try applying for a job in Elson. Just when the atmosphere in the laboratory was subtle, there was news of a visitor outside the magic tower. So they hurriedly began to busy themselves with today's experiment. The mage in charge of reception ran to the door and was surprised to find that the visitor turned out to be another magister of the kingdom, Strange. The status of this which was equal to that of Crone, so no one dared to slight her. After informing Crone, she was escorted all the way to the laboratory at the top of the tower. Strange was wearing a slim-fitting sky-blue robe with a small and exquisite magic wand at her waist. At this time, she was holding a magic journal and a thick stack of papers full of words in her hand. She looked like she was ready to discuss academic. After pushing the door open, Crone did not seem to be welcoming her warmly. He was staring at the operating magic circle in front of him, recording the experimental phenomena while asking, "Have you finished the experiment on your side?" Quite smoothly. Strange naturally put the things in her hands on the table, then sat on the chair and waited for the other party to finish writing the last few sentences. Ever since the journal Magic had thrown out a brick to attract Jade, almost all the mages couldn't hold back and began to submit their articles one after another. Of course, they would not directly publish the latest research. Instead, they picked a few small topics that they had researched before and used them to test the waters. In fact, they were also curious about the level of this journal's reviewer. If the reviewer was a rookie, then they would naturally be happy to publish some useless papers to gain points. However, the result of the submission was a huge blow to these magisters. Never in their wildest dreams would they have thought that Roddy would ask Merlinsera to be a reviewer. Hence, the article that tried to muddle its way through was mercilessly criticized by Merlinsera and marked rejected. The rest of the more reliable papers were sent back with some suggestions for revision. Merlinsera's corrections almost embarrassed a lot of mages and high-rank mages. This was just like how everyone would ask each other about their grades after a class exam. Those who did badly would be ashamed, while those who did well would be in a good mood. Most importantly, they all understood that Merlinsera wasn't making things up, because every word she said was to the point, and no one could refute her. Now, no one doubted the quality of the reviewer for Magic anymore. Crone and Strange's paper was considered to be of some substance, so Merlinsera listed it as one that could be published after revision and review. Because the topic of their research was related to ice magic, the two of them had been in frequent contact recently, and their interactions were much more frequent than before. These days, they had been revising their papers and even redoing verification experiments in hopes that they could pass the review. At this moment, Crone had finally finished writing. After cleaning up the traces on the magic circle, he wiped the ink stains on his fingers and sat opposite Strange. Tapping his wand, he skillfully used Magician's hand to pour flower tea for both of them. Under the effect of the ice magic circle, the tea with honey quickly cooled down. It was a very delicious cold drink in July when the temperature was rising. Have you read the latest Age of Cullen? Elson's Magic Academy has started recruiting teachers. Strange raised his hand, and the newspaper on the table next to him flew to him. Crone had been busy with experiments these days and obviously hadn't read it yet. Now that he took the newspaper and read it, he clenched his teeth and said with a pained expression, "Elson is digging a hole step by step. Not to mention others, I'm afraid those who have used the charged crystal will want to go there. It all depends on whether or not they're willing to terminate the contract with the Lord." "You haven't thought of going there?" Strange wanted to laugh at the old man's expression. It was difficult for non-mages to understand this kind of research attitude that was desperate for the truth. The nobles and the royal family were fleeting to them. For a magister who could extend his life by 100 years, the purpose of these people's existence was to provide resources for him to study magic. As for loyalty and what not, it was better to save it. However, this didn't mean that all mages were vile people who would forget their morals at any time. Every magister in charge of a magic tower would sign a contract with the employer who sponsored them. Both parties were bound to each other and worked together for a win-win situation. This was the living environment of the mages in the kingdom of Karen. Therefore, although Crone was tempted, he definitely wouldn't do something like leave now. He complained a little, but realized that Strange's words had a hidden meaning, so he asked, "Why, do you have any news?" Strange didn't bother to keep him in suspense. He raised his hand and let another piece of paper fly in front of Crone. "You guessed it right. Those guys made big news, here." Crone took it and glanced at it. Suddenly, his eyebrows rose to the sky. "This guy. What is he thinking? Isn't he deliberately letting us go there?" The title of the paper in his hand was written in big characters: Elson Magic Exchange Invitation. It was an official invitation from Elson City to magisters and high-level mages from all over the world, saying that a 100-day magic academic exchange would be held in Elson City in 3 months. It's not just us. All the mages in the Kingdom of Karen with a little bit of fame will be there, and the mages from Lockman will also be there. TSK, this is directly breaking the current magic circle and re-establishing an academic core. Strange reached out and pointed. "See, they're inviting you to the exchange. You don't have to pay a silver coin for your food and accommodation. They even provide access to basic laboratories and paid laboratories. During the exchange, all the academic results of the participants will be included in that month's magic journal. Think about it, collecting all the research of the high-level mages in the country in 100 days. From then on, won't Elson City become the greatest authority in magic in the kingdom?" Mages were all smart. In the eyes of others, this invitation was nothing more than a 3-month academic exchange. No matter how they looked at it, it was Elson City spending a lot of money to invite others to come and support them. But now these 2 magisters saw it clearly. With such an event, together with the influence of magic and various other journals, the magic ecosystem of the entire Kingdom of Karen would certainly change dramatically. Because this move would touch the interests of many people. The current magic circle was also mixed with good and bad people, and if this was done, many people would really show their fear and even lose their jobs. And whether the Karen royal family and the nobles would accept the existence of the other party was also a big problem. But from an academic point of view, this was definitely a way to promote the advancement of magic. Exchange. That's a good word. Even if we have a contract, we can still find a reason to go over. TSK. I was just saying this is a trap at every step. But you still have to jump. Crone looked at the detailed treaty below. Elson City welcomes all mages to bring their magic crystals and carry out a certain percentage of rechargeable crystals for exchange. Isn't this clearly telling you that there is an unlimited supply of crystals there? The invitation also indicated at the bottom that the crystals exchanged here were not allowed to be used outside of Elson City. Obviously, the rechargeable crystals had become an important weight. It made all the invited mages no longer think about going or not going, but how much magic crystal should they bring. So recently, I've been sorting out all the ideas that I want to verify over the years, and see if I can find a better answer in Elson City. Strange had obviously made up his mind to participate in this academic exchange, but Crone had some concerns. I heard that EFTA has extended his tentacles to the area of the Holy Cathedral. I'm afraid His Majesty is disgusted with them. So what if they are disgusted? Can't you see the situation? When our exchange is over, how many mages do you think will be willing to come back and face the current magic tower? Strange's words made Crone fall into silence. It was obvious that those who were slightly clear-headed had already seen the decay and unbearable state of the Karen royal family. This is all EFTA's plot. It's Roddy's trap. Murno tore the letter in his hand into pieces. He was on his way back to his city. When he received Charles II's blame and decision on how to deal with his war, the Count already knew that he was bound to be the scapegoat. He had actually expected such an outcome, but he still had a lot to say to Charles II, because along the way, he realized that Efta's threat to the Karen royal family was far greater than he had imagined. Chapter 652. From Milner's point of view, the Rose Cross and the Viper Cross were no longer trustworthy. This inexplicable war came and ended abruptly. After being fooled, Milner finally understood the crux of the matter. However, when he wanted to warn Charles II, he realized that he had been abandoned. When the Emperor no longer trusted him, Milner knew that even if he stood in front of Charles II and explained the pros and cons, the Emperor would not believe him. Ever since he accepted the mission of attacking Efta, Milner had been surrounded by all sorts of problems. Now, he realized that he should not have been so obsessed with revenge from the beginning. Now, there were only about 50 of his guards left. The rest of the soldiers had been repatriated because Milner could not find enough food for them to follow him. As a result, his troops were not even comparable to a reliable caravan. What made his heart palpitate even more was that on the way back, almost all the civilians chose to stay far away after learning of his name, as if he was a moving plague source. The assets of the Earl's mansion were almost depleted in the war. More than half of the farmland and food in the territory had been taken away by the orcs, not to mention how many people would die in this harsh winter. Just the border of the territory that was connected to the Holy Cathedral was enough to keep him on tenterhooks in the future. Regret, anger, helplessness. As the loser of the war and the political struggle, Milner thought of Earl Moore, who had been hiding at the side for a long time. If he had half of Earl Moore's intelligence, he would definitely be the most important official in the kingdom. But now, as he was thinking about this, the carriage suddenly stopped with the sound of horse hooves. Milner was a little surprised. However, when he peeked his head out, he saw that the soldiers in front of him were being ambushed by a team of cavalry. They were on the main road in the forest. Hundreds of people appeared on both sides of the seemingly peaceful forest in the blink of an eye. Although they were dressed in different sloppy clothes, the shining weapons in their hands and the shining armor under their clothes were extremely dazzling. The troops that were about to adjust their formation were killed on the spot. The guards that Murno had brought were considered elites, but they were quickly defeated by the enemies that outnumbered them 3 to 4 times. The bandits that appeared out of nowhere did not give anyone a chance to surrender. Even after Count Milner's guards threw away their weapons and raised their hands, their heads were still cut off by the bandits' long swords. Looking at the group of bandits, Murno knew what had happened. Although he had lost his power, it didn't mean that he would fall into the abyss forever. Charles II might need him one day, and an order from him might allow him to return to the center of power. Obviously, his political enemies didn't want to see that happen. When the situation in Bergen's territory was chaotic, bandits attacking nobles became the most common solution. When the guards around him were chopped down one by one, Count Milner laughed bitterly and tried to get off the carriage calmly. However, as soon as he opened the door, he was pulled out by the leader of the team. For the sake of your revenge, you have already caused the entire kingdom to lose too much. The knight with half of his face covered in a red scarf spoke in a low voice. Murno immediately knew who he was, the most powerful Grand Knight under Count Moore, Napa. But what was the point of guessing his identity? Knight Napa didn't give him a chance to speak. He pulled out his long sword and slowly pierced it into Murno's chest. Take everything you can and retreat. None of the 50 guards survived. Murno's body was thrown to the side of the road. Knight Napa didn't even look at it and left. After spending 3 days with Sally, Roddy finally left Hollier City and embarked on his journey back to Elson City. After this battle, the Holy Cathedral was unsurprisingly incorporated into Ifta's territory. Not only did it bring the kingdom another piece of territory, but to Roddy, the most important thing was the population of this territory. Currently, the kingdom of Karen was far from being saturated with population. With the increase in productivity caused by the recharging crystal, the most important thing in the future was the population, a large number of people. Roddy was not rich enough to create a large number of arcane puppets to replace manual labor. Therefore, how to make use of the farmers who were fixed in various territories and only knew how to farm was the most important problem that he had to face in the future. In the world that Roddy used to live in, the Black Death had greatly damaged the vitality of Europe. Due to the fragmentation of the marquises, the continuous years of war, and the extremely high infant mortality rate, the population of Europe could not be compared to the centralized countries in Asia. Therefore, in the past few days, Roddy and Sally had a brief discussion about the future development of the Rose Cross. He hoped that this religion would no longer be a China with an independent regime and army, but a prototype of a hospital in the future. Eliminating diseases, improving the infant survival rate, reducing the incidence of common diseases to the population, and extending the average life span of the entire kingdom. This was the focus of the future development of the Rose Cross. As long as they worked hard, they could see results within 20 years. As long as the productivity kept up, the country would quickly enter a period of rapid economic and population growth. Riding on the Kelder and looking down at the land below, Roddy could see that the road, built from Elson to Hollier, had already connected to the first town along the way. The distance was no more than 60 kilometers. For modern people, 60 kilometers was not even a long distance. But here, it was like a natural moat, separating two people who might not have any contact with each other for the rest of their lives. The construction of the railway was obviously much slower. At this time, it had just extended to the small town outside Elson. A large number of orc coolies had joined the work of laying the railway. Because of the influence of the demonic gate, their strength had increased a lot, and their work speed was obviously faster than that of humans. Therefore, the various projects that were originally planned to be completed in the autumn were basically completed by now. Most of the raw material processing plants in the small town, mainly wood and ore, but there were also light industrial plants such as paper mills. Because the small town would definitely expand into a transportation center and an industrial town in the future, Roddy had reserved areas here in advance, using horizontal and vertical streets to naturally separate the factories, residences, leisure, commerce, and transportation areas. It was estimated that in less than 3 years, this place would become an engine that would accelerate the GDP of the whole of EFTA and even the Kingdom of Karen. Quickly passing over the small town, Roddy quickly entered the territory of Elson City. Looking at the bustling streets, Roddy thought for a moment, but directly let the Kelder land on the drill ground of the military camp. At this time, the Dragon Spear Cavalry Regiment had already finished their training for the day. A strong knight was taking care of their beloved horses in the horse farm not far from the city. Good horses needed to be carefully raised, and the owner had to cultivate a relationship with them for a long time. Therefore, this group of knights had to take the horses back and forth every day. On the drill ground in the city, there was a group of people engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Roddy glanced at them and found that these 30 or so people were all field agents of the Elson Central Intelligence Agency. Among them, there were soldiers selected from the military camp, as well as Teflon with various skills. Among them, Nora's figure was the most conspicuous. During the actual combat training, she had been standing there the entire time without moving. Seeing Roddy jump down from the Kelder, the drill instructor hurriedly stopped the training and came over to salute. Roddy waved his hand to signal for them to continue, then pointed to Nora and asked, "Why is she not participating in the training?" This drill instructor was selected from the military by Sodeler. He was not a knight or a warrior, but an advanced level 2 assassin. Logically speaking, his strength should be quite good. But Roddy's question made him feel a little awkward. In reply to the city lord. It's mainly because, her fighting style is a little strange, and I can't beat her. This answer surprised him a little, but he quickly felt relieved. Although Nora had not advanced a level, after a short period of training, she had quickly broken through to the basic level of 23. This high level, coupled with the several talents she had, was really not a match for an ordinary level 5 or below. During actual combat, just don't let her use any skills. After saying this, Roddy prepared to leave, but who knew that the drill instructor would say in a low voice, "City Lord, if she doesn't use skills, I can't beat her." This made Roddy feel strange. He glanced at Nora, who was standing calmly at the side, and thought for a moment. Then arrange for other training first. When the time comes, I will find something for her to do. Yes, City Lord. After leaving the drill ground, Roddy went straight to the center of the military camp. At this time, Sodeler was holding a longsword and slowly practicing his basic skills. It looked simple and unadorned, but in fact, he was thinking about the details of every movement. Genius swordsman did not mean that one could casually fight in a war and surpass the advanced level 60 sword saint. Sodeler could be called a martial arts fanatic, and even if he was not fighting, he would never be idle. After the war ended, Roddy let Sodeler stay in the city. The main reason was that there would be no more wars for a long time in the foreseeable future. If Sodeler and the soldiers wanted to improve their strength, training alone was not enough. And if he stayed in the city, he would quickly slack off and even regress. Thus, before going to Lassiman, Roddy prepared to carefully discuss the arrangements for the future with this powerful deputy. Any new insights recently? Chapter 653. Sodeler finished the last 2 moves before sheathing his sword. He then sat on a stool next to Roddy and drank a mouthful of water. The main reason is that it is difficult to learn from an expert. If I practice by myself, my comprehension will be slower. The only thing I can think of is that these sword techniques are very exquisite but inflexible. Powerful sword techniques are not passed down through fixed moves but through continuous improvement. These words surprised Roddy. He didn't think that Sodeler would feel this way now. With Sodeler's personality, he wouldn't brag so easily. He dared to answer like this because he had reached a bottleneck. Only war can produce experts. You and I, as well as everyone else, know this. You can only learn by moving your muscles and bones. That's why I found some good missions that should help you. I knew you had a way. I've only been here for a month, and I already feel like my bones are rusting. Sodeler raised his eyebrows. That's right, I heard that Milner's army was defeated. What happened to him? He was killed before he could run back to his territory. Roddy knew that Sodeler would always remember this enemy. He offended too many people before. After Charles II gave him up, he lost his backer. Naturally, he ended up like this. Phew, Sodeler looked into the distance and was silent for a while. He was from a noble family, and he knew what Milner's death would lead to. After the death of his only son, there was no legitimate heir in the family. The head of the family suddenly lost his power and was assassinated. The fate of the whole family was to fall apart and fall apart. Bergen will become EFTA's territory sooner or later. Not only Bergen, but all the places you can see will eventually be called EFTA. Roddy's words made Sodeler raise his head. However, he had already expected this. He nodded and said, "Just look at the cabinet reform. You want to completely change this state of disunity. Many people even asked me if I would be unhappy. I think they are the short-sighted ones." These words actually meant something. The cabinet's decision directly changed the status of the various feudal lords. They went from looking after themselves to serving the cabinet together. A large part of their power was taken back. Sodeler was originally a baron of Payer, so he could be considered a lord. However, according to the results of Roddy's reform, He would only be able to control a portion of the territory's tax revenue in the future. The rest, including the right to legislate, conscription, and so on, would be abolished. Naturally, most of the nobles were unwilling to do so. After all, no one would be happy if they lost their authority and had to listen to their superiors. But Sodeler could clearly see that if he continued to manage the territory according to the previous system, let alone dealing with Charles II, the internal friction in various places would probably exhaust him half to death. He knew that he was not suited to be a lord who had to manage everything. The only place where he truly felt like a fish in water was the battlefield. The title of Afdali Blade was not for nothing. His greatest wish was to increase his strength. I know that you won't be able to find an opponent right now, so I plan to temporarily divide the Dragon Spear Cavalry Regiment into 5 teams. After they're divided according to the various professions, they'll go to the locations I've marked to complete the missions I've arranged. Whether it's a magical beast or a relic, there will always be a reward. What Roddy was talking about was actually the PvE team plan that he had planned in the past. There were still countless dungeons and wild bosses waiting to be farmed all over the country. How could he not make good use of them when his mind was filled with strategies? It had to be known that it was easy to level up by farming a few dungeons, and the mission rewards were really good things that money couldn't buy. Naturally, Sodeler agreed to this request without hesitation. Fighting magical beasts was different from being on the battlefield. It required more brains and cooperation, and it also tested one's strength. But what he didn't expect was that Roddy had thought things through even more carefully and specially arranged a mission for him that involved a holy sword fragment. That guy will always be full of nonsense in the beginning, and he'll even swindle you, but you have to do everything he says. This way, after the 3rd or 4th time, he'll tell you what to do. Roddy couldn't directly tell Sodeler about the series of missions, so he could only give him the name of the NPC that initiated the mission and a few key points to pay attention to. The rest was up to him to figure out. If everything goes smoothly, this guy will promise to forge a suitable sword for you, but you have to provide the materials. When that time comes, just tell me, and Elson will give you the best materials to satisfy you. This was a very famous open series of missions that all players could accept. At the end, the other party would provide a chance to forge a sword. The sword's attributes were determined by the grade of the materials provided by the player. The final product would be at least excellent grade, and if the materials were precious, epic grade was not out of the question. Right, I got some good stuff from the trip. I can't use these 2 swords, so they're the most suitable for you. Roddy took out the long sword and short sword from the judgment of the Bone Throne. Sodeler, who loved swords as much as his life, was already fascinated by the missions he had arranged for him. Now that he saw that Roddy had brought 2 swords for him, his eyes immediately lit up as he studied them. The attributes of these 2 epic-grade longswords were very strong, much stronger than the sword that Sodeler was currently using. After all, good weapons were something that swordsmen and knights couldn't get even with money. For this general under his command, Roddy would definitely not be stingy with any rewards. Tisk tsk. The forging method is different from the current weapons, but it's a little similar to the new batch of weapons from the munitions factory. But it's much better than those. Sodeler twirled the sword, marveling at the balance of the sword and the elemental rhythm flowing within it. Roddy knew that he was a sword fanatic, so he patted him on the shoulder to let him take his time and strolled away. Stepping into the Pasha Magic Tower, Roddy walked around the various projects of the Magic Research Department as usual and was very satisfied with the progress. He did not forget to drive the prototype for a while. Then, after being reminded by the researcher, he remembered to give the world's first car a name. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly remembered a magic novel that he had read before, so he wrote down the name Firebolt, which was a name that no one else could understand. This is the first-generation prototype. Use it as the foundation to study the dual front-wheel steering mechanism and gearbox. This will be your next topic. After assigning new tasks, Roddy strode upstairs and opened the door of his laboratory. Misha saw Roddy and came over to please him. This reminded him that he had not had time to study the demonic infection, so he sat in front of his desk and wrote down a few simple experimental plans. But he had not written much when Camilla knocked on the door to report to him. He came back 2 days later than he had expected. Camilla said casually as she put a stack of documents on his desk. This made Roddy feel that he could not take it, so he said hesitantly, Something happened in Hollier, so I came back late. I'd be a fool to believe you. Camilla rolled her eyes and then got down to business. The first batch of weapons and equipment from Tasman has been shipped, and the goods are being verified. This is the transaction list. Tisk TSK. The war is over. We're finally making money. Roddy was delighted. He picked up the list and glanced at it. The first batch of weapons and equipment purchased by the Tasman Resistance was worth a little more than 70,000 gold coins. But they obviously could not afford to buy it directly, so they used a large number of Tasman specialties to convert the price and ship them back. There were more than 20,000 gold coins in total, and the rest were all kinds of strange things. They really gave us a lot of magic crystal. It can be considered as solving part of the energy problem. Roddy heaved a sigh of relief. He had been worrying about the future sales of the recharged crystal. After all, it was not just for mages. At present, Crone and the others had only felt a small part of the benefit. When the recharged crystal became embedded in the industrial and construction system of the entire kingdom, they would realize how valuable it was. So now, he was using hunger marketing. On the one hand, he was whetting people's appetite to create hype, and on the other hand, he was worried about overcapacity. After all, Roddy had heard of the grain phone trick, and it was never boring to use it. This is probably most of the savings that they can take out right now. The rebel army is still quite poor, Feng Luo said. So I'm talking to the council. Compared to them, these bones should be much richer. Camilla was now very good at this. She skillfully flipped through the records of the letters with the elders of the Undead Council. Roddy could not help but sigh that she was really good at politics. Based on the current conditions, the ratio of investment and return with the elders of the Undead Council could even reach 1:8. This included cobalt gold, silver ore, and iron ore, which were currently in great demand for Elson. The military academy should be recruiting soon, right? When the time comes, there will be a suitable opportunity to let them participate in the real war in the name of military consultant. Fighting a war depended on people, and it was impossible for Sodeler to command them alone. The military academy, an institution that specialized in training officers, could obviously ensure that the backbone of the future army had basic military literacy. He did not want to find himself surrounded by illiterate people when he went to war. Continuing to flip through the list of supplies, Roddy noticed that the rebels had really used everything in order to gather this amount of money. There were 30 to 40 types of rare herbs alone, and at least a dozen of them were rare species that could not be found in the kingdom of Karen. They were important raw materials for making powerful potions and rare potions. And because of the information asymmetry, Camilla had lowered their prices to the same as common goods like hemostatic grass. Chapter 654. Camilla did not know what to say. She pursed her lips and looked down at the ground. She had never experienced the information explosion and all kinds of slang and tricks on the internet, so she felt weird about it. She felt a strange sense of satisfaction, but she also knew that Roddy did not mean anything else. So she felt a little disappointed. Roddy lowered his head and did not notice Camilla's reaction at all. He looked at the herbs that were counted by tons, and then glanced at the advanced potion factory in the list of buildings that had not been unlocked yet. He sighed. As the saying goes, a robber is not as good as a potion seller. Potions, regardless of whether they were high-end or low-end, were very popular in the whole continent. But now this building could not be opened because there were not enough pharmacists in the city. Although he had ordered to recruit talents, there were only 20 or 30 people who were willing to give up their jobs and come here, and there were only a few pharmacists. Obviously, those pharmacists who already had a fixed job did not realize the benefits of Elson City. It seems that the magic conference in 3 months will have to be bigger. All aspects of publicity must be in place. We need to set up a special team to properly plan how to let the people of the country know its importance and influence. Roddy looked up and found Camilla in a daze. He asked curiously, "What's wrong? Are you feeling uncomfortable?" No, I'm thinking about who should be in charge." Camilla tried her best to stay calm and pretended that nothing had happened. Roddy did not ask any more questions. He just looked at her back as she left in a hurry. After writing the plan, Roddy saw Akasha in the map, who had finished today's experiment. He thought about the candidates to go to Lassiman and talked to the little priest about Sylvia, who was now working as a researcher in the Magic Research Institute. "You're back so late and you still want to talk about another woman." "Gosh," Akasha joked, which made Roddy realize that he had made a mistake. Although he knew that the little priest would not be angry, he still needed to pay more attention to such small details in life. But now, Akasha really didn't care what kind of threat an undead like Sylvia could pose. What she cared about was that Roddy had stayed in Hollier for 2 more days. Needless to say, that little girl must have been thinking about it. "I'm just teasing you. You don't have to explain it to me." Seeing that there was no one around, she quietly snuggled into Roddy's arms. Ever since the first time, this kind of intimacy had become more and more natural. Naturally, Roddy was happy to hug her. He continued, "I'm going to Lassiman in 2 days. If you come with me, I think it's better to bring her along. After all, it's too far away. It's hard to guarantee that nothing will happen. It shouldn't be a bad thing to bring her out to have a look." "I see that she's still not used to the laboratory these days." "Not used to it? What do you mean?" "That's right. Perhaps he hasn't accepted the reality before him," Akasha said as she led Roddy to a laboratory in the magic tower. "You'll know after you take a look." Roddy let go of Akasha in his arms, tidied up his clothes, knocked on the door, and entered after getting a response. He then found Sylvia sitting in the corner of the laboratory. The laboratory was very tidy, which proved that she basically did not do anything these days. Judging from her hurried posture and somewhat messy hair, Sylvia should have been hugging her knees in a daze for a long time. Lord Roddy, she was not used to being addressed like this, but her rationality told her that it was necessary for now. Roddy looked at her state and thought for a moment with his eyes narrowed. When Sylvia felt a little scared under his gaze, he finally said, "2 days later, I'm going to take a boat to the other side of the sea to take a look. Your name is in the team accompanying me. I'll let Akasha prepare your luggage, and you'll report to the first floor of the magic tower." After saying this, he turned around and left. Sylvia did not react for a moment and said hesitantly, What? Is there a problem?" No. Sylvia was speechless for a moment because she did not know what to say. In the past few days, not only did she not feel normal in the laboratory, she was even more immersed in an indescribable sorrow. It felt like she was sinking into quicksand. The more she struggled, the faster she sank. Suddenly being arranged to go out to sea, she instinctively wanted to refuse, but Roddy's unyielding attitude made her choose to give up timidly. In fact, this was also Roddy's goal. He knew that there was a problem the moment he saw her state. If he asked at this time, the answer would most likely be rejection, but a forceful request would have a miraculous effect. To him, a living high elf was a priceless treasure, and Roddy definitely did not want to see this high elf cripple because of a random mental illness. "You were so domineering just now. I've never seen you like this before." Walking out of the magic tower, Akasha looked at Roddy curiously. She had tried to persuade Sylvia before, but it was to no avail. But Roddy's opposite attitude had a miraculous effect, causing her to admire him even more. "Domineering? That's all an act. If I'm really domineering, I'll tell you tonight, hee. Roddy laughed deliberately in a very perverted manner, causing Akasha's cheeks to instantly turn red. She reached out and punched Roddy. "Then rest early tonight. Ah. It's already so late, we should go back and take a bath." Roddy looked at the sun that had not yet set, and pulled Akasha back to the mansion with a solemn expression. This scene made Marinsara, who was looking down with Naife from the magic tower, frown. She snorted coldly and walked away in her high heels. "Sister Marinsara, aren't we going to look for Big Brother Roddy?" "What's there to look for? We'll talk about it tomorrow." While Roddy was enjoying his blissful time on the other side of the vast sea, Lockman was holding another regular meeting. The situation in Lockman had been stable recently, and the topics that appeared in the meeting were basically trivial matters. All the academies were working hard in secret, all for the crown of late autumn, that would be held in 5 months. From a modern perspective, the crown of late autumn was similar to the Olympic Games, a grand event that all the academies and nearby countries would participate in. However, the events here were not sports, but martial arts, spellcasting, props, etc. There were a total of more than 10 major events and more than 200 minor events. This custom had existed before Lockman was founded, and after the mages established the country, it continued after slight modifications, becoming a large-scale event that was held once every 3 years. From a political point of view, it was basically used to display the power of Lockman. Chapter 655. The Crown of Late Autumn would only be held in December. Because it had been held several times before, the venue, personnel, and activities had already been arranged, so no one mentioned it at this time. Instead, it was Senator Rodica of Balliner Academy who, like he always did at the beginning of every meeting, began by reprimanding Houdini for not returning to the kingdom. The other 5 academies' representatives had heard this so much that calluses had formed in their ears, while the Branca Academy's representatives continued to lower their heads like ostriches. They did not even have the courage to protest. But no one had expected Speaker Jeremy to interrupt the Balliner Academy's voluminous reprimand today. The old man raised his eyelids and said in a deep voice, "Houdini has already sent news that they are ready to set sail." "Well, all right then. At least he knows what's good for him. I guess he can't get over it himself. Such a treason. Senator Rodica, please watch your words. The Parliament is very strict about treason. Before we hold a vote, I don't think you have the right to use this crime against Magister Houdini." The reason why Jeremy suddenly became so tough was because he realized that the other party's groundless accusations were far more harmful than he had imagined. As the saying goes, 3 men make a tiger. After a few months of tireless accusations, Senator Rodica had successfully made the domestic world biased against Magister Houdini. This was definitely not a political tactic worth advocating. His forceful attitude made Senator Rodica, who was about to say a few more words, speechless. He opened his mouth and knew that the other party was right. If he used words like treason again, he was afraid that someone would argue with him for slander. So, Rodica shrugged and sat back in his seat. However, it seemed that Senator Jeremy did not intend to end this topic. He continued, "Houdini's trip this time has been fruitful. He hopes that everyone present will value the cooperative relationship with the Kingdom of Karen. At the same time, Borodini will also invite envoys and magicians from the Kingdom of Karen to visit Lassiman. The fleet is expected to arrive at the port in mid-September. Jeremy's expression was still as calm as an ancient well. But when his voice trailed off, the representatives of the academies around him began to discuss in low voices. What interested them most was the arrival of the envoy from the kingdom of Karen and the sorcerer. As the leaders of Lacey, who had just established their country and were doing well, their style of doing things was more ostentatious than that of other countries. To put it bluntly, this kind of mentality was never going out at night in luxurious clothes. From the way Houdini put on airs in front of Charles II, one could see that this country loved to show off. Therefore, at this moment, almost all of them were thinking about how to give the other party a show of strength. But among them, the expression of Berena's counselor wasn't very good. The reason they had been attacking Houdini for so long was because his previous information threatened the foundation of the academy. Now that President Jeremy's tone had suddenly changed, it was clear that he had realized something. At this juncture, Belena naturally didn't want Houdini to steal the limelight, so he immediately gave a suggestion. Since the fleet will arrive at the port in mid-September, why don't we bring forward the crown of late autumn, that was originally scheduled for December to October? This way, the envoys of the kingdom of Karen could witness the grand event of Lashiman. I don't think these country bumpkins have ever seen such a grand event, right? That's not a bad idea. But if it's brought forward, we won't have much time to prepare. We're all starting from the same starting line. What's wrong with that? Discussions immediately broke out. At first, some people weren't too happy about it, but as their opinions gradually came to a consensus, all the counselors of the academies agreed that this was the best way to welcome them. They would welcome them with a grand event attended by more than 10 neighboring countries, and at the same time, they would be able to display the absolute strength of Lashiman. It was truly a brilliant plan that killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Then, let's decide by voting. President Jeremy wasn't surprised by this. He only glanced at the counselors of Belena a few more times before starting the voting process. Because of the consensus, everyone quickly passed the motion. Among them, the counselors of Brenka Academy obviously had a bitter look on their faces. In the years since Lashiman was founded, Brenka Academy had basically been ranked at the bottom of all the academies. Therefore, every grand event of the crown of late autumn basically became a time for them to grit their teeth and bear with it. They weren't very competitive in the first place, and now that the date of the grand event was brought forward, it was really one disaster after another for the sorcerers of Brenka Academy. But at this time, how could the counselors dare to vote against it? They didn't even dare to abstain from voting. They hurriedly showed their obedience and voted yes. The motion is passed. Speaker Jeremy picked up a small black hammer and lightly knocked on the meeting memo twice. The sound echoed in the conference hall, and the president saw the different expressions of the counselors of the academies. He didn't say anything about it. In rare silence, he organized the documents and then announced the end of the meeting. This action surprised the counselors who were still excited, but they soon immersed themselves in all kinds of fantasies about the crown of late autumn and forgot about President Jeremy's somewhat distant figure. Hoist the sails. Set sail. Set sail. Woo, the horn echoed on the sea. The carriers around the flagship Boratini all raised their sails. Facing the rising sun, the whole fleet finally started their journey back to Lashiman. The carrier's draft was much deeper than when they came, because the size of Roddy's team was not small. Roddy had a lot of goals for this trip, which was similar to Houdini's feeling when he first came to Karen. He was not just here for a simple state visit, but also to show his strength to Lashiman so that he could take the initiative to speak. Currently, the kingdom of Karen didn't really have any diplomacy in the real sense. Back then, Charles II was played like a fool by Augustine. From the beginning to the end, the two of them were actually not on the same level. However, Roddy had the memory of being a descendant of the Yellow Emperor. The bloody and humiliating treaties in history had taught him the truth that weak countries have no diplomacy. Therefore, for this trip, he was more prepared than Houdini had expected. Chapter 656. On this trip, Roddy had not only brought Akasha, Marinthra, Naifi, and Sylvia, but also a team of 30 barbarian guards and 12 dragon lance knights. Because no matter how he looked at it, Roddy didn't think that Lassman would really welcome him with a smile. At this time, the sea was calm, and Boratini's flagship was large and stable, so no one had shown symptoms of seasickness yet. Roddy turned to look at Akasha and the others who were looking back at the shore from the stern of the ship. He felt that his family business was finally on the right track. Sodalar, Natha, Nora, a group of Dragon Lance Knights, and elite barbarian soldiers were arranged into 5 teams to raid dungeons. In the estimated 3 months, each team would face 5 to 8 dungeons in the nearby forest or ruins. The difficulty of the dungeons varied from low to high, but it would definitely not exceed the upper limit of the team. With the strategy provided by Roddy, excellent weapons, potions, and a sufficient average level, as well as the high-level priests deployed by Sally from Hollier City, it would be difficult for these teams to have any casualties. However, these 5 teams would face large dungeons in the end, so there would probably be some casualties. But this was also one of Roddy's goals. After all, only when the soldiers really faced death could they grow faster. They didn't fight these dungeons just to farm EXP. If everything went well, 8 rare potions, equipment recipes, 2 mineral veins, more than 20 rare herbs, magical beasts, and a group of magical beasts that could really be tamed into powerful warhorses would all be in their pocket. Although the resources in Roddy's hands were too high for him to use because of his high level, they would have a miraculous effect on training the soldiers. You've worked hard during this period. We'll do as you say for the location of the port. You're an expert in these things, so I'll listen to you. He turned his head and chatted with Houdini. The latter's originally depressed state of mind had also improved over the past few days, and now he had returned to his usual hale and hearty appearance. He stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Actually, this place has the foundation to be a port. It's just that the ruins of the city below are a bit regrettable." Houdini pointed at the calm waters beside them. They were already 2 nautical miles away from the shore. The blue water was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Roddy could not see the so-called ruins at all. However, he was very interested in the port city that used to be the High Elves. He stood up and looked down from the side of the ship with Houdini. "The area in front of us is the deep hole that I've explored. For safety's sake, I ordered the fleet to go around it. Because of the terrain, there will be strange whirlpools. I don't dare to take the risk." At this point, Houdini's expression became more serious. Later on, he had actually used magic to investigate this place several times, but to no avail. The failure of an archmage's divination spell usually meant that there was a barrier of a higher level here that he couldn't pry into right now. Roddy was not surprised. He frowned slightly and turned his head to call Akasha over. He gestured at her. Akasha nodded and ran into the cabin to call out Sylvia, who had been cooped up in the room. This high elf seemed to be still immersed in her own world. Only when Roddy spoke to her in a commanding manner could she barely turn her attention to the real world in front of her. "Mage Houdini, if you can, use the spiritual spell visual projection to draw the outline of the ruins below. I have something to confirm with Mage Sylvia." "No problem." Houdini didn't realize that the high elf magician standing beside him was a dead person because her actions were no different from those of a living person. He just sighed inwardly. Roddy seemed to be surrounded by all kinds of beauties. Even that underage girl was a beauty that could bring disaster to a country. How enviable, but now wasn't the time to look at beauties. He looked around and focused on casting a spell. Shadows and shadows formed under Houdini's wand. In less than a minute, the Archmage had drawn the outline of the underwater ruins in front of him. Sylvia moved closer to take a look and pointed at a spot. If I remember correctly, Master Khadgar's magic tower is in this position. She spoke in the High Elf language, so Houdini couldn't understand her. But when he saw where she was pointing, he immediately exclaimed in surprise, "This is the location of the black hole." Roddy nodded. Although he had guessed it before, it was only now that he confirmed it with Sylvia. It was a mysterious feeling to have a witness point out a city that had been sealed for hundreds of years. But at this moment, he was more concerned about Sylvia's state. From the point of view of a modern person, putting aside the difference between life and death, Sylvia should be in a depressed state. There was almost no research on psychology in this era, so even Akasha and the others didn't think of this as a problem. Depression was a very troublesome illness. It wasn't something that could be solved with simple medicine or a few words. Roddy didn't know if this was considered depression. But considering Sylvia's relatively weak personality, he decided to try his own way. "Did you get seasick in the cabin?" "No," Sylvia replied with her head lowered. Her voice was so low that Houdini almost couldn't hear her. "Oh, then I have a mission for you." Roddy pointed at Naife and the others on the other side of the deck, who were shouting at all kinds of fish. "I've asked the blacksmith to make a new set of game cards. I'll tell you the rules later, and you'll be in charge of teaching them how to play." "Me?" Sylvia's voice was weak. She gave Roddy the impression that she was a timid junior who had just entered the academy. She was timid and didn't like to communicate with others. Because of the knot in her heart, she was very resistant to the surroundings. "Yes, this is my first mission for you. Do it well." Roddy asked the attendant next to him to bring a delicate suitcase. He called Houdini and Sylvia over and ran to the long table in the captain's cabin to open it. There were 136 pieces of magic crystal. Houdini curiously touched them and asked, "What are these?" "As far as crystals are concerned, these are all good ones. Magic crystal would lose its original color after its energy was transferred to the charging crystal, and its body would basically become transparent. Magic crystal pieces were the most abundant in Elson City. So Roddy used them as raw materials, polished and dyed them with special dyes to make a standard set of mahjong in this world. Do you see the patterns on them? I'll tell you what they mean and how to play them." Roddy turned to Sylvia and said, "You have to remember them and teach them later." Chapter 657. On the 5th day of the voyage, the Ifertans who were on the boat for the first time had to retreat into the cabin, enduring the shaking and jolting of the boat. But to Sylvia, she felt that the world before her was gradually changing. Who's going to throw the dice? The dealer for the previous round was Merlin Sarah. This time, it's Sylvia's turn. "Oh, okay, it's my turn." Sylvia tucked her bangs behind her ears, picked up the dice, and tossed them gently. The transparent dice made of magic crystal stopped on 4 and 6. She glanced at them and said, 4 plus 6 is 10. Next throw. After saying that, Naife couldn't wait to pick up the dice. She shook it for a long time and muttered some incomprehensible rhymes. After throwing the dice, she calculated where she should move the cards from without even thinking. She pointed with her little finger. "Sister Sylvia, here." Okay." Clack, clack, clack. Sylvia, who had never thought of learning Buellingen, was now playing her cards with practiced ease while rubbing her brows. "Dumb biscuit, my luck isn't that good this round, touch." Akasha's voice was clear, completely different from her usual gentle voice. Her eyes were shining. There was hope that she could get all the tiles in this round. She was so nervous that her hands were sweating. However, Merlin Sarah was the one who played the most. As the highest-level magician, she had won the most on the first day. Her insane memory allowed her to memorize the tiles from the tiny scratches on the back of each tile after 2 rounds. Since everyone here was a magician, it didn't take long for everyone to return to the same starting line. Therefore, this ability, which was no different from cheating, was quickly restricted. Therefore, the neatly stacked tiles were all covered with a spell, preventing them from seeing the details on the back of each tile. What happened? How infuriating. Akasha, you must be holding back some big move. Look at you, you're so quiet when you're nervous. You're definitely up to something. Mylinsara didn't stop talking. Beside her, Naifei's eyes were rolling. Because she was short, there were a few books on her chair, and she was silently counting the cards in her hand. Self-touching, bar. Sylvia wasn't a talkative person, but the moment she opened her mouth, the other 3 families couldn't stop exclaiming Ayaya. She took out a card and touched it, and even she was a little stunned. This blossoms on the bar. Are you going to let us play? Marinthra shouted loudly. Akasha pushed the cards with a bitter smile and said, I was thinking of getting a big one. Naifei pouted as she took the chips and pretended to cry. Boo-hoo, I've lost all my money. Seeing this, for some reason, Sylvia couldn't help but smile. This had nothing to do with how many chips she had won. She only felt warmth at this moment, because the 3 of them didn't treat her as an outsider at all. After being resurrected, Sylvia had always felt that she couldn't integrate into the current society because she was a dead person. This self-isolation was like a continuous hypnosis, so she instinctively thought that she didn't fit in with this world, and that no one would understand her and be willing to interact with her. However, the reality was obviously different from what she had imagined. Everyone was talking and laughing, and there was no discrimination or prejudice at all. The feeling of being accepted cracked the barrier in Sylvia's heart, and she finally started to take the initiative to communicate. Well, when we get the money in Lockman, I'll treat you guys to a big meal. It's a deal, hee. Sure, what's there to eat in Lockman? I'm really curious. Can't we just ask Houdini later? Marinthra looked out of the window. It's almost dinner time. Come on, let's go have dinner. Naifei, remember to eat your biscuits tonight. Please don't say any more. Naifei immediately covered her face. Sylvia and Akasha curiously asked for the reason, but they were both so disgusted that their faces turned pale. They didn't see Naifei winking at Mylinsara with a smirk on her face. In fact, the Borodini was very different from other sailing ships. The large-scale application of the spell formation made this ship not inferior in terms of enjoyment. With the freezing spell formation, the stored meat and cheese were enough to provide a sumptuous dinner every day. However, ordinary crew members naturally couldn't have such a luxurious dinner, but Roddy waved his hand, and all the crew members on this trip were given a can of sweet and sour fruit with sugar water every 2 days, so that the crew members could say goodbye to all kinds of diseases caused by not eating fruits for a long time. Therefore, they were very respectful to the guests of Ifta. At this moment, when they saw 4 beautiful women chatting and laughing passing by, they stood aside and greeted them with a smile. It was a very natural scene, but it made Sylvia sigh with emotion. She suddenly realized that she hadn't smiled ever since she was resurrected, but ever since Roddy assigned her a mission, this kind of heartfelt smile became more and more frequent. No one was an ice cube. Sylvia thought that she was just a very ordinary high elf magician. She didn't have extraordinary talent or beauty, and she was just one of the many people in Elson City. Now that she thought about it, perhaps the fear of being separated from her tribe was the main reason why she closed herself off. Time to eat. At the dining table, Roddy started to use his cutlery, and everyone started to eat the food in front of them. Speaking of which, it was only at times like this that Sylvia felt no different from the people around her, because she realized that she still had a sense of taste, and she didn't have any resistance to food. This was the biggest difference between her and the other undead. Previously, when Sylvia locked herself in the laboratory without eating or drinking, she only felt a little weak, but she didn't know that Akasha had been regularly replenishing her energy with necromancy spells. The undead of Tasman had to be nourished by the aura of dead spirits to move. Akasha initially thought that Sylvia was the same, but she didn't expect that after teaching everyone mahjong a few days ago, Nephi dragged her to the dining table, and after tasting the food, this high-elf undead actually produced energy to maintain her body functions. Roddy and Akasha were amazed. The biggest characteristic of the undead was that they didn't have the ability to digest food, but now Sylvia could eat to maintain her functions like a human. What was the difference between this and being alive? Sylvia was a unique undead in the world, and they still had to find out what was special about her in the future. But in order to increase her sense of identity, Roddy had already called her along for every meal. Now it seemed that eating had a positive effect on Sylvia. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, they chatted about all kinds of topics. Houdini had already made up his mind, so he felt more and more pressure on the way back. His conversation with Roddy basically revolved around the customs and various political stances of Lasman, clearly to let him familiarize himself with this foreign country on the other side of the ocean as soon as possible. Akasha, Nephi, Marinthra, and Sylvia had formed a small group and would gather together wherever they went. This kind of journey was the best way to promote friendship. As women, regardless of the difference in power, age, and experience, they couldn't help but talk about common topics. As for the other magicians who were learning from the kingdom of Karen, they were simply arranged to be in another cabin. Until now, they still didn't know that the greatest enemy of the current royal family was on this ship. After dinner, Roddy stopped Sylvia and invited her to his study to sit down and chat. This high elf's condition was clearly better than before. She didn't even realize that her tone and volume were now not as weak as before. You completed the task of teaching them how to play cards well, so this is the reward you deserve. Misha, who was at the side, wanted to come over but was shooed away by Roddy. He casually took out a belt made of blue leather from a box next to him. The dense magical waves emanating from it stunned Sylvia. She stared at it for a long time and even forgot to thank him. She exclaimed in shock, "This is Solomon's work." "Yes, Solomon left his treasure to me, so I have authority over these things." Roddy's words made Sylvia, who originally wanted to reject him, shut her mouth. Epic tier magic belts were not something that could be found everywhere. Even in the era where she lived, it was high-level equipment that only people of Master Khadgar's level could get their hands on. This was what Roddy had always emphasized, so after a short moment of hesitation, she reached out to take it. "After you complete this task, I will assign you a new task. This time, it is much more complicated than the previous one, but since you have a better understanding of the High Elf magic system, it should not be difficult to solve. Here, the thing is on here. You can think of a solution." Again, Roddy did not give her any room to reject, but this time, Sylvia felt that she had almost no resistance. She nodded and took the stack of papers from Roddy. "What is this?" Sylvia frowned. She looked at the drawings on the paper, and for a moment, she did not know how to describe it. "You can call it plain," Roddy replied with a smile. "It was the civil servant exam before, and now it's the magic exchange." "What the hell is he trying to do?" Charles II frowned deeply. He held the latest issue of Cullen's Era and sat in the armchair in his study, deep in thought. On his desk, there were all the periodicals and magazines that had been published in Elson City for the past few months. From the slightly curled pages, it was obvious that Charles II had gone through them for a long time. There were also many traces of circling and drawing, and even Charles II personal annotations. All these signs showed that the monarch attached great importance to the information media that was currently spreading. Chapter 658. This emperor was not a good-for-nothing idiot. Now, he knew that he had lost the war because of his desire for grandiose achievements. Now that he carefully examined the gap between himself and Roddy, he felt that Roddy really did not seem like a traditional, noble ruler. It was as if he had suddenly emerged from a rock. His parents had died early, and he was of humble birth. But he had extraordinary strength. Judging by his current battle record, he was almost at the level of 1,000 enemies. After the intelligence department contacted many battles related to arrow ambushes, it was basically confirmed that Roddy was a character whose upper limit could not be determined. And such a person had suddenly risen with a ruined city. What did he rely on? He did not have many troops, nor did he have strong economic strength. Making the kingdom rich could not be done with words alone. What Charles II considered most every day was how to face this opponent that gave him the most headache. That's right, after the temple was controlled by Ifta, the royal family and Ifta were no longer as disparate as before. They were now on equal footing. Roddy had replaced Augustine as the thorn in the side of the entire royal family. Logically speaking, what everyone should be worried about now was whether Ifta would take the opportunity to continue attacking south. But when they opened the newspaper, they realized that they had no such intention. On the contrary, Ifta was engaged in internal construction. Yesterday, it was the first phase of the highway from Elson City to Hollier City completed. Today, it was the intercity transportation train from Elson City to Jacobtown opened. Just from the sound of it, one could tell that these were things that required a lot of manpower and resources. Charles II was actually also curious about what the highway and intercity transportation train were, but the intelligence team that he had sent out had yet to reply, so he could only sit here and wait. But behind these news, a set of statistics made him unprecedentedly vigilant. On the piece of paper next to his hand, the names of the magic apprentices, assistants, and even low-rank mages who had left the royal family in the past week were clearly recorded. All in all, the number of people added up to more than 100. It must be noted that even if those people were not the middle-rank and senior-rank sorcerers who could fight on the battlefield, they were all highly educated people who were no longer illiterate. Even the magic apprentices of the lowest level could recite the basic textbooks of magic fluently as if they were a piece of cake. In this era where the illiteracy rate was more than 95%, this kind of knowledgeable person was extremely rare among the 5%. Therefore, the departure of more than 100 knowledgeable people was basically equivalent to the departure of the elite group of 20 to 30,000 people. The total population of the territory controlled by the Cullen royal family was probably less than 300,000. Including the vassal nobles nearby, it would already be impressive if there were more than 600,000. Right now, the royal family could only count about 1,000 orthodox sorcerers. To put it bluntly, the magic apprentices who had left the royal family were the foundation of the future sorcerers of the royal family. Elson City did not say that they wanted to poach people. They just threw out a few recruitment notices, and so many people were out of control. What was the problem? Charles II flipped through The Age of Cullen, and a clue that he had marked out came into view. The second branch of Elson Magic Academy opens in Hollier. Duke and Sally attend the ceremony. 3 academies are located in Ifta's Gold territory. Register now. The Magic Academy and the Magic Academy opened so many in one go? Are you trying to make the commoners literate? Charles II flipped to the piece of information about Ifta's civil service examination that he had noticed before and was silent for a long time. Although Ifta did not organize any attacks, the information that came one after another was like a mountain, inexplicably pressing down on him and making it hard for him to breathe. August arrived as scheduled. On the calm sea, the afternoon sun was unusually vicious. The crew on the deck were all hiding in the shade of the sails to rest. The floating space towers around the hull of the Boratini were immersed in the sea, rising and falling with the waves. The sea breeze blew, and the smell of blood was as usual. At this time, the non-swimmers of EFTA had already passed the initial novelty and were all hiding in the cabin, unwilling to come out. The barbarian soldiers and dragon lancers were used to conserving their energy. To put it bluntly, they were sleeping soundly. Meanwhile, Roddy and the others were in the spacious canteen on the ship, enjoying the cool wind from the freezing magic circle and the ice cream that the kitchen had made according to Roddy's suggestion. Roddy had tried to DIY this thing at home before, so he roughly remembered how to make it. There was no shortage of raw materials on the ship. Apart from the time it took to make the cream, everything else was easily done with the help of magic. So now, almost everyone was holding a bowl of ice cream that was frozen by Merlin Sarah with magic, and eating it happily. Big Brother Roddy didn't know to ask Elson's chef to make such delicious food. I think there must be a conspiracy. Nephi's lips were white, and Roddy laughed when he saw that. What conspiracy could there be? At that time, Elson was poor, and that crappy bread hurt my throat. Even then, your mother still told me to reduce the budget. You don't know, I almost got angry with her once. If the budget was reduced again, I wouldn't even be able to eat bread anymore. I might as well eat dirt. Ha ha, a dignified city lord almost had to eat dirt to survive. You are the only one. Merlin Sarah especially liked to listen to Roddy's embarrassing stories, and she was overjoyed. Akasha looked at Roddy with a gentle gaze and sighed. In the past, I could not even eat bread. When I was the most hungry, I even ate grass. It was just a little better than eating soil. We are not going to have a reminiscence party. By the way, Sylvia, what did the high elves eat back then? Forehead, Sylvia had just eaten a big bite, and she couldn't speak for a moment because of the cold. She only swallowed after a long while. She blushed and said, "Nothing special, just some vegetables and pancakes." The nobles ate good food, but I was born a commoner, so I didn't have the chance to taste those delicacies. The magic tower would add some magical beast meat for us during festivals, and it tasted good. No one at the table felt uncomfortable talking about something that happened 700 years ago. Instead, when Sylvia was talking, everyone was listening attentively, which warmed her heart. However, she was interrupted by Roddy's question. Magical beast meat? Aren't those things inedible? Roddy was right. There was a common understanding on the continent. Magical beast meat was inedible. Eating it would cause all kinds of side effects. If it was light, it would result in diarrhea, and if it was heavy, it would result in death. The cause was also hard to find. Tisk tsk, that's a pity. Magical beast meat actually tastes good. Merlin Sarah licked her lips as she reminisced about the past. However, Roddy rolled his eyes in disdain. She made a face and added, "But normal humans can't eat magical beast meat. Do the high elves have this special ability?" "Not really. I heard that it was specially processed. Other than us, I've never heard of anyone else eating magical beast meat." Sylvia's explanation made everyone nod in understanding. However, Naifi was energized and asked Roddy to find a way. Naturally, Roddy agreed to her request. Chapter 659. After saying that, Roddy activated Sprint and dashed to the captain's cabin, followed closely by Merlin Sarah. Sylvia was stunned for a moment. As a mage, she knew that she was also a combatant. She looked back at Akasha and Naifi, nodded, and also chased after them. "What's going on?" Enemy attack alert, coming from under the sea. In the captain's cabin, Houdini looked at the magic circle in front of him with a serious expression. In Roddy's eyes, this magic circle was a radar, but he could not judge the symbols and colors displayed on it. Houdini knew that it was necessary to explain at this time, so he said, The magic circle detected an unknown object approaching. Number 1, over 10 meters long. How far is it? Less than 500 meters, approaching quickly. Houdini realized that something was wrong. There were many creatures under the sea, but he had never heard of anything that would rush out of the deep sea and head straight for the ship. He made a prompt decision and immediately activated the ship's defense measures. At the same time, he activated all the floating space towers. For a moment, the magic circle buzzed all over the ship. Roddy knew that he could not be of much help in the captain's cabin, so he ran to a room not far away to grab a weapon, a quiver of arrows, and went to the deck with Merlin Sarah. As soon as the two saw the sunlight outside, they felt the ship's shield shake violently, and a large splash of white water suddenly splashed on the surface of the sea. The shield is not broken, the thing is over there. Merlin Sarah determined the enemy's position from the elemental vibration of the shield. Holding her wand, she ran to the port side, only to see that the floating space towers around suddenly turned in unison, and the multiple ballistae on the towers aimed at the black shadow that had just appeared on the surface of the sea, and a round of volleys was fired. Half of the metal ballistae that were as thick as a fist missed, but the other half hit the target. These ballistae were extremely powerful and had an explosive effect, creating a large shock wave on the spot. However, during this round of attack, Roddy heard a sound that sounded like metal colliding. With his environmental acuity activated, his eyesight was excellent, and he saw blood splattering in the midst of the chaotic splashes, dyeing a large area of the sea red. The huge creature that was 10 meters long did not retreat, but instead turned around and rammed into the ship's shield, and with a bang it was bounced off again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The accuracy of the second volley was much higher. The monster's body that was exposed on the surface of the sea was immediately blown up, and its speed immediately slowed down. But even so, it was still as if it was possessed, constantly turning its body and stirring up waves, hitting the shield again and again. However, after the third and fourth round of attacks, the monster, which was almost like a hedgehog, finally stopped attacking the flagship. Instead, it flipped over on the spot and died. It was obviously not the first time that the Borodini had encountered such a situation. After the battle, the floating space tower approached the monster's corpse, took off the hook, and dragged it for a few nautical miles before slowing down. The mages went to the deck to cast a spell and dragged the monster out of the sea. After plucking out the 4-meter-long crossbow bolts, the corpse was placed on the deck of the flagship. Luo D, Merlin Sarah, and Sylvia, who was standing behind them, didn't do anything. As individuals, they were indeed powerless in the face of such a huge creature. Roddy imagined that if he were to pass by this place in a small transport ship, he would probably be sunk by this monster without any resistance. Only a capital ship like the Borodini, which had a large displacement and was fully armed, could easily kill this kind of monster. Although this battle looked easy, it really showed the current strength of the Lachman Kingdom in sea battles. It was said that it would take a lot of money to build a century-old navy. However, looking at this bloody monster, Roddy had a strange expression on his face. He smelled something familiar from the fishy smell in the air. The huge fish was thrown on the deck with its body full of crossbow bolts. After the sailors fixed it, they began to cut open the surface of the body. 3 or 4 people had to work together to pull out the huge bolts that were left in the monster's body after the arrowhead exploded. When Houdini rushed over with the battle mages on the ship, his expression was no longer as grim as before. After all, this was the first time the Borodini had been displayed in front of Roddy. Lachman's navigation skills were obviously on point, and Roddy had to give it a thumbs up. However, he was more interested in the huge fish in front of him. What is this? Does it attack ships often? Houdini's mind was full of question marks. When the fleet from Lachman to Kowloon, no one was so blind. Creatures at the bottom of the sea wouldn't attack a ship that was so much bigger than itself for no reason. Therefore, he approached and carefully examined it for a long time. He touched it here and there, and even used magic to examine it. After a while, he said hesitantly, "Logically speaking, this is an Ayrshire shark." Seeing that the alarm was lifted, Naife and Sylvia also gathered around and looked curiously. Neither of them had been to the sea before, so they couldn't help but exclaim when they saw the 10-meter-long Ayrshire shark. Now that they heard Houdini's explanation, Naife said excitedly, "Is this a big shark?" Brother Roddy said sharks are very fierce. No wonder they even hit ships. In fact, Ayrshire sharks are very gentle. They shouldn't be so aggressive. Houdini told Roddy his doubts. Logically speaking, they usually move in the deep sea and rarely come close to the surface. I know about this thing because I wrote a thesis on divination and deep-sea positioning more than 10 years ago. At that time, Ayrshire was a very typical deep-sea shark. Lachman had a department in charge of fish research, and there was a lot of information about it and even specimens. Roddy's understanding of marine fishes was limited to various kinds of popular science books. As for the marine creatures in this world, he basically had no knowledge of them. Because he had been active inland, no one had looked at the sea, so he could only rely on Houdini's judgment. However, looking at the shark covered with bones, he felt that it was somewhat familiar. After getting closer, he reached out and knocked on it. Then, Roddy asked, "So this kind of creature usually won't take the initiative to attack others? Then what did it grow these bone armors for?" Chapter 660. A Mutant. Roddy had a strange feeling. He waved his hand, and the infected beast Misha, who had been hiding in the cabin, ran over. When it saw Urza, its tentacles and stinger suddenly stood up as if it had detected something. Roddy looked at its behavior and had an idea. "In the deep seas there are some strange creatures, right? Are there any intelligent races?" Roddy changed the topic and gestured to Houdini to the side. "Lachman has studied the sea for more than 10 years and has indeed found traces of intelligent races. But they are deep in the sea and have no effect on the surface and land. Also, they are not strong." "Really? Mermaids?" Roddy raised his eyebrows. This information was beyond his imagination. Because the corpses that were fished up by chance looked like fish, but had limbs like frogs, so we called them mermen. Mermen. Roddy's expression was strange. His mind was filled with strange noises. He felt that this world was really strange. Houdini understood why Roddy asked this. He pointed to the Ayrshire and said, "If it is a new breed bred by the mermen, or if there is some other reason that caused the mutation, then it is possible." Without waiting for Roddy to reply, he saw Misha suddenly open his mouth after sniffing for a long time. He actually tore off a piece of the Ayrshire's meat and started chewing on it with a crunch sound. "Hey! You can't eat this. The Ayrshire is a magical beast with a magic crystal. You will be poisoned if you eat it." Houdini quickly stopped him, but Roddy looked at Misha's status bar and waved his hand. "It's okay. Let it eat. Tell the sailors to leave a part of it and deal with the rest according to the procedure." Houdini did not suspect anything. What he needed to do now was to record the incident and write down as many details as possible. After all, the Borodini had the ability to fight back in the face of such a threat, and a simple transport ship might be directly sunk. The future transport trade with Ifta was a sure thing, and the transport fleet did not have the protection of a flagship like the Borodini. Therefore, the attack on the ship cast a shadow over Houdini, and he did not expect that all this seemed to be just the beginning. In the next 10 days, the fleet encountered a total of 5 similar incidents. The ships that were attacked included the flagship Borodini and the transport ships that followed it. Fortunately, the creatures that attacked the fleet were not as large as the Ayrshire sharks from before, and the damage they caused was also within the acceptable range, so there were no serious accidents such as casualties. But what puzzled Houdini the most was that while these incidents were happening, many of the crew witnessed dead fishmen floating on the surface of the sea. Could it really be related to the merfolk? Houdini tried to send ships to retrieve the corpses of the fishmen. Since the fishmen lived far away from the Lassiman coastline, there were no records of fishmen coming ashore since the founding of the country. Therefore, all the research on the fishmen was based on the information and clues provided by long-distance ships. But to his disappointment, when the ships went one round in an attempt to find the corpses, the underwater creatures had long since feasted on the corpses. There were all kinds of creatures in this area of the sea. No one could guarantee that the bottom of the sea was safe. Houdini had no choice but to give up. Combining the attacks, Houdini made a rough preliminary judgment. The behavior of these creatures was very abnormal, completely different from their usual habits. Moreover, these creatures had completely lost their minds when they attacked. There was even a mutated swordfish with a smaller head that died on the spot because its head was smashed into the ship's bow. These creatures were originally as docile as the Ayrshire sharks, but now their bodies had suddenly become fierce and manic. This situation made him realize that there might be some kind of anomaly at the bottom of the sea, but even he could not go to the bottom of the sea to investigate. Therefore, he could only record the information and write it into a research paper, and publish it in a professional journal, so that the mages who specialized in marine research could have their research materials. However, this didn't last too long. After passing through that sea, the fleet returned to its previous calm and peaceful state, and didn't encounter any more attacks. On the other hand, Misha, who was beside Roddy, had a good time these few days. He was gorging on the meat of the dead sea creatures. After eating for a few days, Roddy discovered that the creature's level had increased by 5 levels. At the same time, his body had undergone some slight changes. Its muscular body had become a little more slender, and it looked very streamlined. Its claws were webbed, and its tail with a tail needle had become a lot flatter. Roddy was also surprised by this change. However, according to the information obtained from the demon control in his mind, the infected beasts did have such an ability. Apart from being able to infect ordinary creatures with the demonic bloodline, they could also consume the flesh and bones of creatures with the demonic bloodline to obtain a part of the creature's power and slightly increase their own strength. At this point, Roddy had also confirmed one fact. The sea creatures that attacked the fleet were all creatures that had awakened the demonic bloodline. The ripple before the closing of the demon gate seemed to have a far greater impact than he had imagined. At the beginning of September, the Lassiman kingdom was busy preparing for the upcoming crown of late autumn. As the main goal of the Parliament had changed from showcasing strength to intimidating the messenger of the kingdom of Karen, all the academies had spent more money than before to decorate the venue of each event. They tried to make it as grand as possible, in order to show off the most prosperous side of the kingdom. After all, the kingdom was rich now, and there were no wars to fight. Although the crown of late autumn was expensive, it was a good thing to show off the kingdom's prestige. Everything could be damaged, except for their pride. Not only did the councillors of Lassiman stand firm on this, but they also spent a lot of effort on publicity. Newspapers, plays, slogans on walls, announcements in various squares, and other means were used. They quickly spread the slogan, "This is the symbol of Lassiman's great rise." Now, it seemed that any old man selling bread on the street could go on and on about the importance of the crown of late autumn to Lassiman. In terms of the use of publicity, Lassiman was ahead of Ifta. However, the mages of Lassiman did not seem to care much about the incoming messenger of Ifta. Chapter 661. Because Belena Academy was close to the port, they directly took on the task of receiving Houdini and Karen's envoy. Therefore, Councillor Lodica had direct jurisdiction over specific matters. At this time, He was holding the budget written by his subordinate. After a few glances, he opened his mouth to reprimand. Houdini said that the envoy from the kingdom of Karen has brought his own guards? Haha, that's good. When the time comes, let him do his own thing. What does this have to do with us? What the hell is this welcoming ceremony you wrote? Spending so much of the budget on getting people to throw petals and arrange formations, is it too much to do? What's the point of an envoy from a small place like the kingdom of Karen? It's already giving him face to open up a path for us. The attitude towards the envoy obviously represented the mainstream ideology of the current rulers of the country. Back then, in order to put on a facade, Charles II could not wait to pull everyone out and display them like vases for others to see, to show off his ruling power. But the same way, Lockman pursued, strength is king, and did not want to waste his energy on the details. Not all countries were countries of etiquette. Lockman and the group of mages who governed the country were obviously purposive people and could not be bothered to be polite on the surface. The subordinate who was reprimanded understood the counselor's meaning. He immediately amended the contents of the list and presented it to the counselor. Sir, what do you think? Originally, he had arranged for Roddy and the others to stay in a high-end hotel near the magic tower of Corin Mill. But now, with the counselor's instructions, it was naturally the most economical to stay in Tucker Alley. Although it was not a slum, it was basically a street of taverns for retail merchants and peddlers. As for the food, I will inform these taverns. As long as it is edible, it will be fine. If they are not satisfied, they can pay for it themselves. At this point, Counselor Lodica nodded in satisfaction. That's right. Good magic crystal should be used in high-level magic circles. These small fries can be casually sent away. Anyway, when the time comes, I will let them have a good taste of despair. Counselor Lodica's words were not spoken in private, but had been publicly expressed on many occasions. However, his words did not attract any criticism. Instead, they won the unanimous approval of the political circle. This situation naturally illustrated a remarkable fact. This was the value system of the Lashiman kingdom. Their prejudices and arrogance towards the kingdom of Karen are predetermined positions. That was why they didn't think of giving any respect to these weaklings. Because weaklings don't deserve respect, was the common belief of all mages. What's the big deal about disrespecting the emissary? Bolinar Academy's heart was actually tense. They hadn't forgotten Houdini's message, so no matter what method they used, they had to make the kingdom of Karen realize that they weren't worthy of having the trading rights to be on equal footing with Lockman. As for the cobalt mine, they naturally had another trump card prepared. The chairman of the parliament, Jeremy, was well aware of Bolinar's blatant words and methods. But because he was well aware of it, he didn't make any comment. Where there was interest, there would be conflict. Since Houdini was stupid enough to cause trouble, Jeremy wasn't Brenka Academy's umbrella, so naturally, he wouldn't help. He also knew that by sitting back and watching, he was actually siding with Bolinar. But for the sake of the entire Lockman kingdom, Bolinar directly targeted the envoy from the kingdom of Karen, which was actually the result he wanted. Mages couldn't be bothered to waste time on pleasantries. Jeremy couldn't be happier that someone was willing to test the other party. Faced with such a huge difference in strength, would these foreign visitors be able to withstand it? Jeremy had thought about this question before, but he wasn't worried at all. If they could withstand it, then so be it. If they couldn't, then scram. Lockman wasn't an orphanage. They would only respect the strong and not show mercy to the weak. This was the foundation of the Lockman kingdom. If they didn't do this, how could the surrounding dozen small countries obediently submit to them? How could they send troops to pay tribute every year? President Jeremy flipped through the memo for today's meeting and wrote a brief outline for the next meeting. He stood up and walked to the laboratory, stunned for a few seconds. Then, he sighed and turned to leave. He wanted to continue the experiment according to his original idea, but it was obvious that the bottleneck he encountered this time was more serious than he had imagined. After repeating the experiment for a month, he still couldn't get satisfactory data. He felt that the road ahead of him was basically a dead end. But changing the experiment method was easier said than done. The existing conditions forced him to stop the experiment. Jeremy felt that he needed to relax for the next few days and rest his brain. Simply repeating the experiment was no longer meaningful to him. After leaving the Mage Tower, President Jeremy carried a bag of fishing gear and casually put on a straw hat. Then, he strolled to the cliff at the edge of the city. He looked at the huge rock where the waves hit, and as expected, he saw a familiar figure. Then, he used the levitation spell and walked down the cliff to the side of the old man who was fishing. He casually touched the rock with his wand, and the melted rock immediately turned into a suitable stool. Jeremy slowly put on the fishing gear and bait, cast the hook, and calmly sat down to wait. The old man next to him had white hair and beard. He looked even older than Jeremy. Although he was wearing a linen shirt that had been washed so many times that it had turned white, he was actually a famous strong person in Lochman. In terms of combat ability, this old man was much stronger than Jeremy. He could be said to be a strategic existence. However, he was good at fighting and not good at research, so he didn't persist in the experiment and writing papers like Jeremy. It seems that you guys made quite a scene. Why are you still in the mood to fish? Shouldn't you be so busy that you can't sleep? The old man's voice was very easygoing. With the fishing rod by his feet, he completely looked like he was wasting his time basking in the sun. This kind of rock was very noisy because of the continuous crashing of the waves, but because of the existence of the soundproof enchantment, President Jeremy could clearly hear the old man's words. These are all trivial things. There's no need to worry about it. Fishing is also to change the mood. Recently, the experiment hasn't been too successful. Jeremy's tone was somewhat respectful. After all, the old man in front of him was a senior. Even if he didn't participate in politics, his words still carried a lot of weight. Is that so? Then I guess you'll have one more thing to worry about. I was planning to look for you in a few days, but I didn't expect such a coincidence today. In that case, let me tell you about it. Chapter 662. Judging from the posture of the murloc in the ice, it must have been dead for some time before it was discovered by the old man. Because the outer part of its body had been eaten by various fishes, only its slightly hunched body was left. They don't usually appear in the coastal waters. Jeremy took a closer look and found that not only was the murloc huge, but the shape of its head was also much fiercer than he remembered. Several strange bone spurs protruded from the surface of its body, giving it an indescribable sense of aggression. This was completely inconsistent with the marine research data in recent years. In the eyes of Lochman researchers, murlocs had never been aggressive. Because they lived in the distant seas, only a few sightings were recorded by long-distance fleets, and they were generally only about 1.4 meters tall. Therefore, Jeremy knew that the murloc in front of him was probably completely different from those. I guess we'll have to increase the number of research ships in the open sea and issue a few more missions. What an eventful time. The border hasn't been peaceful recently. Jeremy rubbed his brows. This made the old man turn his head with interest. Border? There are still small countries that are dissatisfied with Lochman? It's not that they're dissatisfied with Lochman. Icegar has initiated wars against the countries next to it. I don't know what's wrong with them. Maybe there'll be another war. Isn't that a good thing for us? That's true, but I always feel that ever since the new King Talia came to power, Icegar has been a little out of control like a mad dog. This doesn't feel good. Mad dog, Jeremy narrowed his eyes. On the 8th of September, The fleet led by Houdini had entered the familiar waters and was expected to reach Lochman in 3 days. The sailors in the cabin were much more active than before. Wandering at sea for more than a month was not a comfortable thing for anyone, so the soldiers from Iferto were even more excited than the sailors. The burly barbarians shouted and played bare-chested wrestling, while the cavalrymen swung their swords back and forth, venting their exuberant energy. Inside the cabin, Sylvia held a cup of ice cream as she skillfully drew a card with one hand. Then, she slapped it down. Self-draw. 13-1. Ha ha ha. Ah, how is this possible? It must be fake. My gold coins. Naife, Akasha, and Merlin Sarah all crowded around her to see if she was cheating. Then, they began to rummage through the gold coins on the side and asked Sylvia to pay for all the food and lodging expenses. Sylvia patted her chest and promised with a smug look on her face. Anything you have, please. Just find the most expensive one. Ha ha. Above the joyful cabin, Houdini was revising his thesis on the mutant deep-sea creatures in the captain's room. Roddy pushed the door open and entered, intending to talk to him about the arrangements after they went ashore. He saw the words written by Houdini's quill and pointed at it curiously. Deep-sea creatures? Can I have a look? I'm still working on it. Take a look and give me some suggestions. Houdini was just being polite because he knew that Roddy had never written a thesis before. In other words, the entire kingdom of Karen did not have a systematic thesis system. The paper in magic was too shallow in his eyes. If it were in Lochman's hands, he would definitely be scolded like a dog. Roddy was actually curious about how Lochman's thesis was written. As a graduate of the new era, he had read a lot of papers to complete his graduation thesis. Speaking of undergraduate experience, he did not really remember much about his major after graduation. However, the change in his way of thinking and logic was something that could really benefit him. Therefore, after a brief reading of Houdini's thesis, Roddy came to the conclusion that although there was nothing wrong with Houdini's thesis, the way he expressed it was extremely messy. There were no diagrams or diagrams. After reading for a long time, he felt that it was all over the place. There was no logical order for him to quickly grasp the key points. A single leaf in autumn. Based on the level of the Archmage's thesis, Roddy estimated that 80% of Lastman's theses in the entire sorcerer world had similar problems. The reason why it did not improve was probably because everyone was used to it. What do you think? Houdini felt that in terms of professional knowledge, he was way better than Roddy. Therefore, when he asked this question, he could not help but sound like he was waiting for praise. Naturally, Roddy would not find fault with him directly. He nodded and said, "You saw a lot more details than I did. These analyses are all unheard of before, but they are obviously very useful for reference. I think Lochman has accumulated a lot of research on marine life. In comparison, the Kingdom of Karen probably still has a lot of blank space in this area. After all, Lochman has already conquered more than 10 small countries nearby. Now it has set its sights even further. Otherwise, the current resources will definitely not be enough in the future." This was naturally something to be proud of. However, seeing that Roddy still had something to say, he asked curiously, "Is there something you don't quite understand?" "It's not that I don't understand. I was thinking that you will publish this thesis, right?" "Yes, the journal in charge of marine life, Deep Blue. I have written 3 theses before. It is currently the most authoritative marine academic journal in Lochman," Houdini said confidently. Houdini spoke very confidently. After all, these papers had brought him a lot of arcane energy points. However, Roddy did not ask any more questions. Instead, he picked up a pen and looked at his thesis while drawing a simple bar chart. All the data in Houdini's thesis was directly listed, which made Roddy, a modern university student, dizzy. Now that he saw the chart, he immediately felt refreshed. After that, it was time to sort out the logical order. Roddy was a science and engineering major. The structure of his previous thesis was generally asking questions, making hypotheses, making plans, doing experiments, analyzing results, and drawing conclusions. To put it bluntly, this kind of scientific research thesis was to make an analysis after comparison. Therefore, the experimental steps were skipped. However, for the thesis to be qualified, it had to be simple, easy to understand, and clear. These were the prerequisite. Houdini's words alone could not pass the test. All he did was rearrange the content of the thesis. Of course, in order to respect Houdini's results, Roddy wrote a brief outline on the draft paper. At the same time, he wrote a table of contents in front of it, indicating a clear structure such as 1. Research on the mutant species of Ire sharks and 1. Abnormal behavior. In less than 2 to 3 minutes, Roddy finished writing the outline. Together with 2 drawings that he had drawn casually, Roddy handed them to Houdini and said, "In the EFTA research department, I asked them to write in this format. I didn't change the content because I think it's already very good. However, if the format is optimized, it should read better. Of course, this is just my personal opinion." Chapter 663. Houdini, on the other hand, was silent. He was holding the 2 drafts written by Roddy. His eyes were shining as he stared at them. He was so engrossed in them that he did not speak for a long time. 10 minutes later, he sighed and said with a bitter smile, "I thought I was better than you in terms of academic standards, but now it seems that I'm still far behind." He was truly convinced by his opponent's strength. As a prophecy magus, Houdini was also an invited reviewer of 2 journals. Therefore, his understanding of the format of Lachmann's thesis was far deeper than Roddy had imagined. Because of this, he could see the importance of this format. Just by changing the format, the speed of reading the thesis could be doubled. At the same time, the results of his research would be more eye-catching because of the existence of the diagrams. Most mages relied on their good memory and basically just listed the numbers in their heads for comparison. However, doing so would waste too much time and energy, and the efficiency of reading would be very low. However, habit was a scary thing. Once everyone accepted this rule, no one would consider changing the format. Therefore, no one in Lachmann had ever used the bar graph, the most basic form of statistic. He was sure that after Roddy revised the thesis for him, it would definitely cause a sensation in Lachmann. It's just a change in format. The most important thing is the content. My academic standards are definitely not as good as yours. Don't be modest about this. Roddy smiled. He had a rough idea of what to do. He stood up and said, "Then you can continue to revise it. I'm going out for a walk." As he walked out of the captain's cabin, Roddy felt a little amused. He did not expect that he could still use the knowledge he had learned in university in this world. However, because of this, he became even more interested in Lachmann. Lachmann, which had accumulated knowledge for decades in a healthy academic environment, might really be a treasure. Roddy, who was strolling along the wooden corridor, was about to go to the deck to get some fresh air. He did not expect to bump into Merlin Sarah, who was holding a can of food. He looked behind her curiously. "You're not with them?" "They said they were going to the stern of the ship to compete in fishing. I don't like to use that thing, so I came here to take a walk." She was munching happily when she suddenly stopped with a frown. She tilted her head and sniffed at Roddy's shoulder. She asked curiously, "I've always been curious. Ever since we boarded the ship, I've always felt a familiar smell when I stand next to you. What's going on?" Roddy knew it was because he had reached level 30. He thought for a moment and took out the dragon crystal from his chest. "Here. You! Don't tease me, how is this possible?" Marinsula's expression changed drastically. She immediately realized that the familiar aura on Rhodey's body was the aura of her former dragon. But this was not realistic at all. After the power of the magic crystal was extracted, it could only exist as an energy state. For example, it could be used to activate a magic circle or recharge a charging crystal. No one would be able to sense any aura from the magic crystal. But Roddy's current condition even frightened her. Even with her experience, she had never seen anyone who could retain their original aura after absorbing the energy of the dragon crystal. Because this meant that a part of the dragon's abilities had to be preserved. It's a skill of the Witchers. If it wasn't for me, it would have been lost. Roddy briefly explained what had happened, but Merlin Sarah did not look relieved. Instead, she asked in a more serious tone, "That's it? You directly absorbed the power and condensed something like a magic crystal in your body?" "Yes, it's right here." He pointed at the left side of his heart, but Merlin Sarah pressed her hand on it and closed her eyes to try to connect with it. The next moment, Roddy felt the same feeling he had when he used the soul connection with Merlin Sarah. He looked at Merlin Sarah strangely and realized that he could feel her emotions, curiosity, nervousness, and, the connection was suddenly cut off. Merlin Sarah looked at him calmly and shook her head. "I've never heard of such a situation before, but I'm sure it's not as simple as you think." "Then what should I do? Isn't everything fine now? You easily obtained the ability similar to the dragons. This doesn't conform to the rules of this world. So, there must be a price." Merlin Sarah turned her head and looked at the sea, maintaining her calm and nonchalant expression. He didn't notice. He definitely didn't notice. Phew. Roddy did not continue to think about the soul connection, just now. He was only thinking about what the price was. But he didn't notice any debuff in his status bar, and his body was also in full condition. He couldn't figure out what the problem was, so he could only give up. Changing the topic, he glanced at Merlin Sarah, who had advanced to level 29 as an elementalist, and asked, "You've also reached a bottleneck, right? Have you thought about how to break through?" According to Solomon's inheritance, the solution he gave is to perform a summoning spell across planes. "But I've never done this before, so it's a little difficult." She frowned, obviously troubled by this. Roddy wanted to help, but he couldn't. He was only a dabbler in magic, and if Merlin Sarah found it troublesome, it was better for him not to get involved. "Maybe the problem will be solved when we reach Lashiman. After all, we're here to learn." Roddy comforted her, but Merlin Sarah was not in the mood. She only said in a low voice, "I hope so." On the 17th of September, the fleet approached the coastal waters of Lashiman as scheduled. Houdini made a series of communications with the port early in the morning. Because of the large number of ships in the fleet, they had to make space for the ships in the port as much as possible. At the same time, they had to prepare the transportation of carriages and so on. Therefore, the people from IFTA waited on the deck for 2 to 3 hours before they received the news that the ships were allowed to dock. Everyone else was fine with it, but Captain Houdini was very dissatisfied. Borodini is the largest flagship in Lashiman at the moment, and the return date is exactly 1 day away. How can they not prepare for it? It's not like I don't know how long it takes for the ships to move from the port. It's not right to make us wait for so long. Chapter 664. However, Roddy did not intend to protest now that Lasman was deliberately making things difficult for him. Although his current identity was the envoy of the Kingdom of Karen, Roddy did not intend to act like an ordinary diplomat. Because he was the head of IFTA, or even the first in command, he did not need to consult anyone on diplomatic decisions. His attitude was IFTA's attitude. Before he left, he deliberately asked Houdini to conceal his identity and report to the Lasman Council that he was an ordinary envoy. The reason why Roddy did this was to see Lasman's real attitude. This attitude would, to a large extent, determine Roddy's future diplomatic plans with Lasman. As for the royal family of the Kingdom of Karen, it would sooner or later be swept into the trash heap of history. This time, Roddy directly came under the banner of the Kingdom of Karen. As for the difference between Ifta and the royal family, there was no need to explain it at all. The ship slowly approached, and the capital of the Kingdom of Lasman appeared clearly in front of Roddy. The prosperity of the port city was very impactful in this era. The capital of Lasman, Duriel, was composed of two parts. The flattened half of the mountain formed the main body of Duriel. The steep terrain made it extremely defensible without the need to build additional walls. Several tunnels extended from the mountain all the way to the port area below. At this moment, ships of all sizes almost occupied the entire field of vision. Behind the masts were a large number of buildings in the port. Most of the houses were beige. The buildings in the coastal cities used this color to withstand the wind and the sun. The densely packed buildings were spectacular, busy and prosperous. This was everyone's first impression of Lasman. Between the layers of buildings, there were people and carriages moving back and forth. With a casual glance, one could tell that the population of the port area alone was estimated to be more than 30,000. There were more than 1,000 ships in the shallow and deep water port. Most of the ships were out fishing, so there were still many ships sailing in the open sea. But one thing was for sure, even if all the ships in the ports of the Kingdom of Karen were combined, they would not be able to compete with the number of ships in front of them. Port Niblon is divided into several areas. The one in front of us is the civilian area. After the Borodini unloads its cargo here, it has to go to the military port on the other side to rest. There are larger warships and transport ships there. When the flagship and the transport ship slowly docked, Houdini naturally became their tour guide. He pointed at the tall mountain in the distance and the city on top. Behind the port is the main body of the city, but the whole city is built on the mountainside, so to get there we need to walk uphill. I've already informed the council in advance. The welcoming team will settle everyone down and arrange the meeting time and place. As Houdini spoke, he felt a little emotional. Looking at the familiar city, the sense of loss and disappointment in his heart from being abandoned inexplicably lessened. After all, this was the home he grew up in and the country he was proud of. I'm sorry to trouble you during this period. Will you report to Brenka Academy after you disembark? Roddy had good eyesight. He glanced at the shore and turned around with a faint smile. Yes, I have to submit these reports to the council and report to them in person. Then, I'll submit the paper I wrote on the way. After revising it according to the way you said, I think this paper will probably give me a lot of arcana points. When the time comes, if you need to use points, just come to me directly. I have a lot of points in stock. Houdini seemed a little excited. Previously, he did not like to take on everything, but now he had a leave everything to me look on his face. He was very enthusiastic. Phew! Finally, we're disembarking. Naifei stretched her waist. She had played a lot of mahjong along the way. Staying in the cabin every day without exercising, she felt that her waist seemed to have gained a circle of flesh. She was very envious of Sylvia and could not help but reach out to touch her waist. I wish I had your ability. No matter how much I eat, I won't get fat. I feel that my face is round. Let me see how round it is. Before Sylvia could say anything, Roddy reached out his hand and pinched it. When Naifei pouted and waved her fist in protest, he let go of her with a smile. It's good to have more flesh. I'm afraid that I won't have enough when I'm growing up. Akasha, who was at the side, scratched her face in embarrassment. Rhodey's obsession with her body always made her feel proud and shy. However, she did not notice that Sylvia beside her let out a sigh of relief. She really did not know how to answer Naifei's question because her identity as an undead was very sensitive to her. Fortunately, Rhodey seemed to have unintentionally helped her out. Sylvia looked at Rhodey, who was chatting and laughing with Naifei. She did not know if it was a coincidence or if it was intentional. That was because during the few times they talked, Rhodey had always been forceful and did not give her any room to refute. No matter how she looked at it, he did not seem like someone who would consider his subordinates' feelings. We've reached the shore. Sylvia, don't forget to treat us to delicious food. Marinthra straightened her robe, and her high heels clacked loudly on the deck. The flagship Boratini had the largest berth in the deep-water port, and in order to unload the large amount of cargo on the ship, there were a total of 6 wooden passageways connecting the upper, middle, and lower levels. These passageways were for the passengers, sailors, cargo, and livestock to use respectively. Naturally, Roddy and the others had to take the most spacious and comfortable passageway for the passengers. Houdini had already disembarked from the ship with his students, including the mages from the Cullen Kingdom, because he had to go through a series of handover procedures. They watched in confusion as Roddy and the others disembarked from the passenger ladder. Since they had lost contact with Roddy after they boarded the ship, they still did not know who Roddy was. They did not know that Prime Minister Eiffel had taken control of the Holy Cathedral before he boarded the ship, and they did not even know that Roddy and the others were carrying the banner of the envoy from the Kingdom of Karen. Roddy had no intention of interacting with them. He just looked at the so-called welcoming team in front of him. The corners of his mouth curled up as he walked up to them. "May I ask if you are the members of the Lashiman Kingdom's welcoming delegation?" After disembarking from the ship, Houdini went to a nearby house alone, while the other magicians returned to their respective colleges. There were only 5 young men in robes, standing in front of Roddy's passenger ladder. If it were not for Roddy, Marinthra and the others would have thought that they were just ordinary staff on the shore. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.